Elena Cruz stood frozen in the hallway of her $1 million Brooklyn apartment building, rain-soaked and trembling, not from cold, but from the sudden humiliating realization that the most powerful tech CEO in New York couldn't even get into her own home. Her keycard blinked red. Again. And again. Behind the locked door waited silence, expensive furniture, and absolutely no one who cared whether she made it inside. But in the apartment next door, a man she'd never met was about to unlock far more than just a jammed electronic lock. He was about to unravel every assumption she'd built her empire on. If you want to see how a single storm-soaked night can completely transform two lives, stay with me until the end of this story. And please, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The storm hit Brooklyn with the kind of violence that made even native New Yorkers pause. Rain didn't just fall, it attacked, driven sideways by wind that howled through the narrow corridors between brownstones and glass towers. The streets emptied quickly, leaving only the desperate and the foolish outside. Elena Cruz was both. She stood in the marble lobby of the Ashford, one of Brooklyn's most exclusive residential buildings, and watched water stream from her coat onto floors that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a month. Her reflection in the polished elevator doors showed exactly what she'd become. A woman whose $3,000 suit was plastered to her body, whose carefully styled hair hung in dark ropes around her face, whose meticulously applied makeup had surrendered to the rain hours ago. She looked human, vulnerable, imperfect. She hated it. The elevator ride to the 8th floor was silent, except for the mechanical hum and the quiet drip of water from her clothes. Elena stared at the ascending numbers, mentally cataloging the disaster her day had become. The emergency board meeting had gone worse than anticipated. 3 major investors were threatening to pull funding. The press had somehow gotten wind of the internal turmoil at Tech Vista, the company she'd built from nothing into a billion-dollar empire. Her phone, now dead after she'd forgotten to charge it in the chaos, had been exploding with crisis messages when it finally gave up. And now this. Coming home to an empty apartment in a building where she knew absolutely no one, where she'd chosen to live precisely because the neighbors minded their own business and left her alone. Perfect privacy. Perfect isolation. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that seemed obscenely cheerful given her circumstances. Elena stepped into the hallway, her wet shoes squeaking against the hardwood floors. The motion sensor lights flickered on, illuminating the path to apartment 8B. She reached into her bag for her keycard, fingers fumbling past her dead phone, past the emergency protein bars she never ate, past the small bottle of prescription anxiety medication she'd been taking more frequently lately. The keycard should have been in the interior pocket where she always kept it. It wasn't there. Elena's hand stilled. A cold sensation that had nothing to do with her wet clothes spread through her chest. She pulled her bag open wider, looking inside with growing urgency. Wallet? Yes. Business cards? Yes. The key card? No. No, no, no. She dumped the contents of her bag onto the floor right there in the hallway, not caring about the water damage to the papers and receipts that spilled out. She sorted through everything with increasingly frantic movements. The key card wasn't there. Elena sat back on her heels, staring at the scattered contents of her professional life, spread across an expensive hallway floor. When was the last time she'd actually used the key card? This morning. She'd definitely had it this morning because she'd been annoyed by the new security system the building had installed. More secure, the management had promised, which meant more complicated. Had it fallen out somewhere? In the car service she'd taken to the office? During one of the 17 meetings she'd attended today? When she'd grabbed coffee from the cart outside the building before the storm hit? She looked up at her apartment door. 8B, right there, 20 feet away. Inside was dry clothing, a charged phone, food, warmth, everything she needed, but it might as well have been on the moon. Elena stood slowly, walked to her door and tried the handle anyway. Locked, of course. She pressed her forehead against the cool wood and closed her eyes. Somewhere deep in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to a sob tried to surface. She swallowed it down hard. Get yourself together, she thought fiercely. You've built a billion-dollar company. You've negotiated deals with people who would destroy you without blinking. You've faced down hostile boardrooms and skeptical investors and journalists who wanted nothing more than to watch you fail. You can handle a locked door, but standing there, soaked and exhausted and utterly alone, Elena couldn't quite convince herself that was true. The sound of another door opening made her turn. 20 feet down the hall, apartment 8A's door swung inward, and a man stepped out. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, wearing worn jeans and a faded blue t-shirt that had clearly seen better days. His dark hair was slightly too long, and he had the kind of face that suggested he smiled easily, though he wasn't smiling now. He was looking at her with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. The question was so simple, so direct, that Elena almost laughed. Was she okay? No, she was very much not okay. But she'd spent 15 years building an image of unshakable competence, and that training didn't disappear just because she was having the worst day of her life. "I'm fine," she said automatically, "just locked out." The man glanced at her apartment door, then back at her. He took in her soaked appearance, the contents of her bag still scattered on the floor, the way she was standing with her arms wrapped around herself. His expression shifted into something that looked like understanding. "Do you have a spare key? Or maybe building management could help?" "The building uses electronic key cards," Elena said, hearing the edge of frustration in her own voice. "And management's emergency line goes to voicemail after 6. I've already tried." She hadn't actually tried because her phone was dead, but she wasn't about to admit that to a stranger. The man was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "I might be able to help. I'm Daniel, by the way. 8A. Elena. She didn't offer her last name. "And I appreciate the offer, but unless you're a locksmith—" "Close enough," he said. "I used to work in security systems. Electronic locks were part of my focus. May I take a look?" Elena hesitated. Every instinct she'd honed over years of business dealings told her to be suspicious. People didn't just help. They wanted something, information, access, leverage. But she was cold, wet, exhausted, and out of options. And something about the way he'd asked, "May I take a look, not let me fix this for you," suggested he understood the difference between offering help and asserting control. "All right," she said. Daniel walked down the hall toward her door, moving with an easy confidence that seemed at odds with his casual appearance. He knelt in front of the electronic lock panel, examining it closely without touching anything. "This is the new secure home system," he said. "Building just installed it?" 3 weeks ago." "Thought so. I recognize the model." He glanced up at her. "Do you have building manager contact information? Even if the emergency line goes to voicemail, there's usually a backup protocol." Elena's jaw tightened. "My phone's dead." "You can use mine." He pulled a phone from his pocket, several generations old, with a cracked screen protector, and handed it to her without hesitation. She stared at the phone in her hand. When was the last time someone had simply given her something without expectation? She couldn't remember. The building manager's number went to voicemail, as expected. Elena left a message that she tried to keep professional despite her circumstances, then handed the phone back. "Thank you," she said. "Don't mention it." Daniel studied the lock panel again. "These systems have a manual override for emergencies. The building should have given you a physical backup key when they installed the new system." They had. Elena vaguely remembered a small envelope being slipped under her door a few weeks ago. She'd probably thrown it out with the junk mail without opening it. "I don't have it," she said. Daniel nodded, unsurprised. "That's what most people do with those." "All right, let me think." He sat back on his heels, his expression thoughtful. "These locks are designed to be tamper-proof, but they're also designed to fail safe in case of power outages or system malfunctions. There's usually a mechanical component that can be accessed if you know what you're looking for." "And you know what you're looking for?" "I used to design systems like this." He said it matter-of-factly, without pride or self-consciousness. "Different company, different lifetime, but the principles don't change much." Elena watched as he examined the lock panel more closely, his fingers moving with the careful precision of someone who understood not just how things worked, but why. There was something mesmerizing about watching competence in action, real competence, not the performative kind she saw in boardrooms every day. "Daddy?" The small voice came from Daniel's still-open apartment door. Elena turned to see a little girl standing in the doorway, maybe 6 or 7 years old, wearing purple pajamas with stars on them. She had her father's dark hair and a stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand. "Hey, sweetheart," Daniel said, his voice immediately warming. "I thought you were asleep." "I heard talking." The girl looked at Elena with open curiosity. "Who's that?" "This is Elena. She's our neighbor in 8B and she's locked out of her apartment. I'm trying to help her get inside." The girl padded into the hallway in bare feet, apparently unconcerned about strangers or the lateness of the hour. "Are you wet because of the rain?" "Very wet," Elena confirmed. "That's not good. You could get sick." The girl looked up at her father. "Can she come inside while you fix it? She looks cold." Elena opened her mouth to decline. She was fine. She didn't need anything. She could wait in the hallway. But Daniel was already standing. "That's a good idea, Maya." "Elena, you're welcome to wait inside where it's warm. This might take me a few minutes." "I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding," Daniel said simply. "Maya's right. You're soaked and it's cold. Come on." He walked back toward his apartment, clearly expecting her to follow. Maya took Elena's hand with the unself-conscious trust of a child who'd never learned to fear strangers and led her inside. Apartment 8A was nothing like Elena's carefully curated space next door, where hers was all clean lines, expensive minimalism, and interior designer perfection. Daniel's was lived in. Books overflowed from shelves onto stacks on the floor. A worn couch faced a modest television. Children's drawings were held to the refrigerator with magnets. A kitchen table was covered with what looked like homework papers and a half-finished puzzle. It looked like a home. An actual home where people lived and laughed and made messes and didn't worry about everything being perfect. Elena felt something twist in her chest. "Sit down," Maya instructed, pointing at the couch. "I'll get you a towel." The little girl disappeared down a hallway before Elena could respond. She stood awkwardly in the middle of the living room, dripping water onto someone else's floor, feeling more out of place than she had in years. Daniel appeared in the doorway. "I'm going to grab some tools. Maya will take care of you. She's very good at taking care of people." "She's sweet," Elena said. Something flickered across Daniel's face. Pride mixed with sadness, mixed with something Elena couldn't quite identify. "She is. She's everything good in the world." He disappeared again, leaving Elena alone in the warm, cluttered apartment. She could hear him moving around in another room, the sound of a drawer opening and closing. Through the window, rain continued to hammer against the glass. Maya returned with a towel, oversized, slightly worn, and decorated with cartoon characters. She held it out to Elena with both hands. "Here, you can dry off." "Thank you." Elena took the towel and pressed it against her face, letting it absorb the rain and the smeared makeup and the exhaustion that seemed to have seeped into her very bones. When she lowered the towel, Maya was still watching her with that peculiar intensity children sometimes have. "Why do you look so sad?" the girl asked. The question hit Elena like a physical blow. She wasn't sad. She was fine. She was always fine. Fine was what she did, what she'd built her entire identity around being. "I'm not sad," she said. "Just tired. It's been a long day." Daddy says tired and sad sometimes feel the same. Maya climbed onto the couch and patted the cushion beside her. "You can sit down. It's okay." Elena sat, feeling the couch give under her weight, feeling the warmth of the apartment seep slowly into her cold skin. Maya scooted closer and held out the stuffed rabbit. "You can hold Snowflake if you want. She makes me feel better when I'm sad. I mean tired." The rabbit was clearly well-loved, with one ear slightly longer than the other, and patches where the fur had been worn smooth. Elena took it carefully, cradling it in her hands like the precious thing it clearly was. "Thank you, Maya." They sat in silence for a moment. Through the wall, Elena could hear Daniel working on her lock. Small sounds of tools against metal, the quiet concentration of someone solving a problem. "Do you live all by yourself?" Maya asked. "Yes." "Don't you get lonely?" Yes, Elena thought, every single day. But she said, "I'm very busy with work. I don't have much time to feel lonely." "That's sad," Maya said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Daddy's busy too, but we still have time to be together. He says that's the most important part." Elena looked down at the little girl beside her. at her open face and her absolute certainty that the world was a place where people had time for each other, where being together mattered more than being busy. When did Elena stop believing that? Daniel reappeared in the doorway, a small toolkit in his hand. All right, I think I've got what I need. Maya, you keeping our neighbor company? We're friends now, Maya announced. I let her hold Snowflake. Daniel's eyes met Elena's, and she saw understanding there. He knew exactly how much trust his daughter had just extended. That's a pretty big honor. I know, Elena said softly, handing the rabbit back to Maya. Thank you for trusting me with her. You're welcome. Maya hugged the rabbit close. You can come back and visit if you want. We have cookies. Maya made them yesterday, Daniel said. They're actually good, if you can get past the fact that she uses about twice as much sugar as any recipe calls for. They're supposed to be sweet, Daddy. They're definitely sweet, baby. He looked at Elena. I'm going to work on your door. You're welcome to wait here, or you can come supervise if you want to make sure I'm not doing anything suspicious. Elena stood. I'll come with you. Maya, thank you for taking care of me. You're welcome. Don't forget to come back for cookies. In the hallway, Daniel knelt in front of her door again, this time with his toolkit open beside him. Elena watched as he worked, his movements careful and deliberate. He wasn't forcing anything, wasn't trying to muscle his way past the lock's security. He was working with the system, understanding its logic and finding the path of least resistance. You said you used to design these systems, Elena said. What do you do now? Maintenance, Daniel said without looking up. Mostly residential buildings, some commercial, basic electrical, plumbing, general repairs. Something about his tone made Elena think there was more to that story, but she didn't push. They were strangers, after all. Strangers helping each other through a small crisis on a storm-soaked night. And you're raising Maya on your own? Yeah. This time there was no missing the grief that shadowed his voice. Her mother died 3 years ago. Cancer. It was fast. Too fast. I'm sorry. Me too. He made a small adjustment to something inside the lock panel. But Maya's amazing. She keeps me going, keeps me honest. Kids have a way of seeing through all the bullshit we tell ourselves about what matters. Elena thought about Maya asking why she looked sad, about the casual way she'd offered comfort with a worn stuffed rabbit, about her complete certainty that cookies and friendship were important things worth making time for. She seems like a remarkable kid. She is. Daniel sat back, examining his work. All right, moment of truth. He stood and gestured to the keypad. Try your palm print. Elena pressed her hand against the reader, not expecting anything. But the panel beeped once, twice, and then flashed green. She heard the mechanical click of the lock disengaging. How did you? The system was stuck in a loop, Daniel explained, gathering his tools. Probably happened during the power fluctuation when the storm hit. The override I accessed reset the system's memory without wiping your biometric data. Should work fine now, but you'll want to report the glitch to building management so they can check the whole system. Elena stared at her now open door, then back at Daniel. You just fixed it. That's generally the goal when something's broken. No, I mean, she struggled to find the words. Most people would have told me to call a locksmith, to wait until morning, to deal with the building management bureaucracy. Daniel shrugged. Most people don't know how these systems work. I do, so I helped. It's not complicated. But it was complicated, Elena thought. In her world, everything came with strings attached. Every favor had a price. Every act of kindness was leverage waiting to be used. But this man had spent the last 20 minutes helping her without asking for anything in return, without even asking her last name. Thank you, she said. Really, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. You're welcome. He closed his toolkit. Get some dry clothes on before you catch pneumonia. And if the lock gives you any more trouble, I'm right next door. He turned to leave, and Elena heard herself say, Wait. Daniel paused, looking back at her. Your daughter said something about cookies? A slow smile spread across his face, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his features from merely kind to genuinely warm. She did mention that. They're actually pretty good. if you like things that taste like pure sugar delivered via cookie form. I don't think I've had a cookie in about 5 years, Elena said. My nutritionist has strong opinions about refined carbohydrates. Well, tonight seems like a good night to rebel against your nutritionist. He gestured toward his apartment. Come on, Maya will be thrilled. They walked back to 8A together. Inside, Maya had apparently decided to wait up, because she was sitting on the couch with Snowflake, her eyes drooping but determined. Did you fix it, Daddy? All fixed, and Elena came back for cookies. Maya's face lit up. Really? Really, Elena confirmed. The little girl scrambled off the couch and ran to the kitchen, returning with a plastic container full of misshapen but enthusiastic-looking chocolate chip cookies. She held it out to Elena like a treasure. Take 2. They're better when you eat 2. Elena took 2 cookies and bit into one. It was almost absurdly sweet, slightly undercooked in the middle, and absolutely perfect. She could taste the care that had gone into making them, the joy of a child learning to create something with her own hands. These are amazing, she said, and meant it. Maya beamed. See, Daddy? I told you people like them sweet. You were absolutely right, baby. Daniel ruffled his daughter's hair. Now it's really time for bed. You have school tomorrow. But Elena just got here. And Elena is very tired and very wet and needs to go home and get warm and dry, Daniel said gently. You can see her another time. Maya looked at Elena hopefully. Will you come back, for real? Elena looked at this little girl who had offered comfort to a stranger, at her father who had helped without asking for anything in return, at this warm, messy, real home they'd built together. She thought about her own apartment next door, expensive, empty, perfectly curated, and perfectly lonely. I'd like that, she said quietly. Promise? I promise. Maya nodded, satisfied, and hugged her father good night. She paused at the hallway to her room and turned back. Good night, Elena. I'm glad Daddy helped you. Me too, sweetness. Good night. When Maya had disappeared into her room, Daniel walked Elena to the door. The storm was still raging outside, but somehow it seemed less oppressive now. Thank you again, Elena said, for everything. The lock, the towel, the cookies, your daughter's incredible. She is, Daniel agreed. And you're welcome. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day. Elena walked the short distance to her own apartment, which now opened easily at her touch. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the pristine space that had never quite felt like home. Then she looked back at Daniel's closed door, behind which was warmth and laughter and the kind of genuine human connection she'd forgotten could exist. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, but something had shifted. The isolation she'd chosen, the perfect loneliness she'd cultivated, it suddenly felt less like a choice and more like a cage. Elena changed into dry clothes, charged her phone, and sat down on her expensive couch in her expensive apartment. Her phone immediately started buzzing with messages. The board, the investors, the press, all the various fires that were burning in her professional life. But for the first time in years, she didn't immediately dive into crisis management. Instead, she sat quietly, thinking about a little girl who believed in cookies and kindness, and a man who fixed broken things without asking for anything in return. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside something had begun to shift. Elena didn't know it yet, but her entire carefully constructed world was about to change. And it had all started with a locked door, a stranger's kindness, and the simple question, "Are you okay?" She still didn't have an answer to that question, but for the first time in a very long time, she thought she might want to find one. In the morning, when Elena left for work, she found a small plate covered with foil sitting outside her door. A note in a child's careful handwriting read, "More cookies for you, love, Maya." Elena stood in the hallway, holding the plate, and felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, but opening. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in years. But she stood there for a long moment, holding cookies made by a child who barely knew her, and wondered when her life had become so small that this simple gesture felt revolutionary. She took the cookies inside, placed them carefully on her kitchen counter, and went to work. The crisis was waiting. The board was hostile. The press was circling. Everything that had been falling apart yesterday was still falling apart today. But Elena Cruz, who had spent 15 years building an empire on ruthless efficiency and emotional distance, found herself thinking about warmth and kindness and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was another way to live. She didn't know what that way looked like yet, but she was starting to think she wanted to find out. And it had all started with a man named Daniel who knew how to open locked doors. Though, as Elena was beginning to realize, the most important door he'd opened had nothing to do with electronic locks, and everything to do with the walls she'd built around her own heart. The storm had passed, but its effects would linger far longer than either Elena or Daniel could possibly imagine. Because sometimes, the most important moments in our lives arrive disguised as small crises on rain-soaked nights. Sometimes the people who change everything are the ones we least expect, and sometimes being locked out is exactly what we need to finally find our way in. The crisis meeting started at 7 in the morning, which meant Elena had been awake since 5, reviewing documents and preparing for what would likely be the most hostile boardroom she'd faced in her career. She sat at the head of the long conference table in TechVista's headquarters, surrounded by men in expensive suits who looked at her with varying degrees of skepticism and barely concealed satisfaction at her troubles. Marcus Chen, the company's CFO and her closest ally on the board, sat to her right. Everyone else in the room wanted her gone. "Let's be clear about where we stand," said Richard Bauer, a venture capitalist who'd been pushing for Elena's removal for months. "3 major clients have delayed renewals pending resolution of our security vulnerabilities. Our stock price has dropped 18% in 2 weeks, and the Wall Street Journal is about to publish an exposé on our internal dysfunction. This is a leadership crisis." "It's a technical crisis," Elena corrected, keeping her voice level, "which we're addressing with a complete system audit and reinforced protocols. The vulnerabilities were identified and contained before any client data was compromised." "Identified by accident," Richard shot back, "because your security team failed to catch them during routine testing. That's not leadership, Elena. That's negligence." Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with these confrontations, but she pushed through it. "Our security team operates under protocols I personally approved. If you're questioning their competence, you're questioning mine, and I'm prepared to defend both." "Perhaps that's the problem," said Victoria Hastings, another board member who'd aligned herself with Richard's faction. "You've built a company culture that doesn't allow for dissent or alternative perspectives. Everyone's afraid to tell you when something's wrong." "That's not true," Marcus interjected. "Elena has consistently—" "Marcus, we all know you'll defend her regardless," Victoria interrupted. "You've made your loyalty clear, but loyalty doesn't fix security holes or restore investor confidence." The meeting deteriorated from there. 2 hours of accusations, deflections, and barely professional hostility that left Elena feeling hollowed out and exhausted. By the time they finally adjourned, she'd managed to hold off a vote of no confidence, but just barely. She had 2 weeks to demonstrate measurable improvement or face forced resignation. 2 weeks to save everything she'd built. Elena returned to her office and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment before walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked lower Manhattan. The city stretched out before her, millions of people pursuing their own ambitions, fighting their own battles, building their own empires. She'd never felt more alone. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "You okay?" She didn't answer. Instead, she opened her laptop and began reviewing the security audit reports again, looking for something she'd missed, some insight that would give her an advantage. The technical language blurred together after a while, endless strings of code and vulnerability assessments that all pointed to the same conclusion. Her company's foundation had cracks, and she didn't have the expertise to fix them. Elena worked until past midnight, when even the cleaning crew had finished and gone home. The office was silent except for the hum of the ventilation system and the occasional ping of her email. She'd accomplished exactly nothing productive in the last 6 hours, but stopping felt like admitting defeat. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Marcus. The message was from an unknown number. "Hi, Elena. This is Maya. Daddy helped me send you a message. Do you like the cookies? I hope you have a good day. Your friend, Maya." Elena stared at the message for a long moment. Somewhere in Brooklyn, a 7-year-old girl was thinking about her, hoping she'd had a good day, offering friendship without agenda or expectation. She typed back, "Hi, Maya. The cookies were delicious. Thank you for thinking of me." The response came almost immediately. Daddy says you can come for dinner tomorrow if you want. We're having spaghetti. It's my favorite. Elena looked at her laptop, at the work that wasn't getting done, at the crisis that wasn't getting solved. She thought about going home to her empty apartment, eating something microwaved while standing at her kitchen counter, then lying awake until exhaustion finally dragged her into fitful sleep. I would love that, she typed. What time? 6 o'clock. See you tomorrow. Elena set her phone down and allowed herself a small smile. It faded quickly as reality reasserted itself, but for a moment, she'd felt something other than the constant pressure of impending failure. She packed up her things and headed home. The building was quiet when she arrived, all the respectable residents already asleep. Elena let herself into her apartment and went through her evening routine on autopilot. Shower, skincare, the anxiety medication she'd been taking more frequently, then bed. But sleep didn't come. She lay in the darkness, listening to the muffled sounds of the city through her expensive windows, and thought about locked doors and broken security systems, and the fundamental difference between fixing something and forcing it. The next morning brought new disasters. The Wall Street Journal article went live at 6 a.m., and it was worse than Elena had anticipated. Anonymous sources from inside Tech Vista painted a picture of a CEO who prioritized growth over security, who ignored warnings from her technical team, who created a culture of fear that prevented honest communication. Some of it was true. Some of it was exaggerated. All of it was devastating. By 9 a.m., 2 more board members had called for her resignation. By 10, 3 clients had officially suspended their contracts pending investigation. By 11, Elena was sitting in an emergency damage control meeting with her PR team, listening to them debate crisis management strategies while she felt her empire crumbling beneath her feet. "We need you to make a statement," said Jennifer Park, her head of communications. "Something that acknowledges the concerns without admitting liability. Something human and relatable that reminds people you're not just a CEO, you're a person who cares about making this right." "What would you suggest?" Elena asked, her voice flat. "Personal accountability. Maybe share something about why you started this company, what it means to you, why you're committed to fixing these problems. Give them a reason to believe in you again." Elena nodded mechanically. She'd give them what they wanted because she always gave them what they wanted. That was how this worked. You performed. You projected confidence even when you felt none. You never let them see the cracks. The meeting dragged on for another hour. By the time Elena escaped back to her office, she was running on caffeine and adrenaline and the grim determination that had carried her through every previous crisis. But this felt different. This felt like something fundamental was breaking, and she didn't know how to stop it. At 5:30, Elena realized she was supposed to be at Daniel's apartment in 30 minutes. Her first instinct was to cancel. She had too much work, too many fires to put out, too many people demanding her attention. But then she thought about Maya's message, about the simple joy in that invitation, about the promise she'd made. And she thought about spending another night alone in her apartment, drowning in problems she couldn't solve, pushing herself toward exhaustion without getting any closer to solutions. She packed up her laptop, left the office, and headed to Brooklyn. Daniel answered the door in jeans and a worn t-shirt that said Brooklyn Marathon 2019, looking relaxed and comfortable in a way Elena had forgotten was possible. Maya appeared beside him immediately, bouncing with excitement. "You came! I told Daddy you would come!" "I promised I would," Elena said. She held out a bottle of wine she'd grabbed from her office stash. "I wasn't sure what to bring." "You didn't need to bring anything," Daniel said, accepting the bottle. "But this is nice. Thank you. Come on in." The apartment smelled like tomato sauce and garlic bread. Maya grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her toward the kitchen, chattering about her day at school, and the spelling test she'd aced and the butterflies she'd seen during recess. "And Mrs. Patterson said I could be line leader tomorrow because I helped Tommy when he fell down, and I'm going to pick the song we sing during morning meeting, and I think I'll pick the Rainbow Song because everyone likes that one." "Maya, breathe," Daniel said with gentle amusement. "Let Elena get her coat off at least." "Sorry," Maya smiled up at Elena. "I'm just excited. We don't have people over for dinner very much." "I'm excited too," Elena said, and was surprised to realize it was true. Dinner was chaotic in the best possible way. Maya insisted on showing Elena everything in the apartment, Her room with its collection of stuffed animals, her drawings on the refrigerator, the puzzle they were working on of a tropical beach scene. Daniel moved easily in through the small kitchen, stirring sauce and checking pasta and assembling salad with the efficient grace of someone who'd been doing this alone for a long time. "Can I help with anything?" Elena asked. "You can open that wine if you want," Daniel said. "Glasses are in the cabinet above the sink." Elena found the glasses and poured wine for both of them while Maya set the table with mismatched plates and napkins folded into elaborate shapes that immediately fell apart. "She goes through phases," Daniel explained. "Last month it was origami. This month it's fancy napkin folding. Next month it'll be something else entirely." "I'm learning about lots of things," Maya said proudly. "Daddy says curious people are smart people." "Daddy's right," Elena said. They sat down to dinner together, and Elena couldn't remember the last time she'd done this, just sat and ate with other people without checking her phone or thinking about work or calculating how the interaction might benefit her professionally. She tried to relax into it, but years of habit were hard to break. "So what do you do for work?" Daniel asked, serving spaghetti onto Maya's plate. Elena hesitated. She'd spent so long being Elena Cruz, CEO, that being just Elena felt foreign. "I run a tech company. We do cybersecurity and data protection for other businesses." "That sounds important." "It's supposed to be." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "Right now, it's mostly just complicated." Daniel glanced at her with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to show. "Rough day?" "Rough month, actually. We're having some technical problems that are turning into business problems, and I'm not entirely sure how to fix them." "What kind of technical problems?" Elena took a sip of wine, debating how much to share. But something about the quiet warmth of the apartment, the easy acceptance in Daniel's expression, made her want to be honest. "Security vulnerabilities in our core system. My team identified them, but not before they could have been exploited. We got lucky that no client data was actually compromised, but the perception of weakness is almost as bad as actual weakness in this industry." Daniel was quiet for a moment, twirling spaghetti on his fork. Maya was busy arranging her meatballs into a pattern on her plate, not paying attention to the adult conversation. "Have you brought in outside consultants?" he asked. "Several. They all say the same thing. We need to rebuild from the foundation up, which would take months and millions of dollars we don't have right now." "And your internal team?" "They're good at maintenance, but this requires a different kind of expertise. The people who designed our original system aren't with the company anymore." "Why did they leave?" Elena set down her wine glass. "That's complicated too." Daniel didn't push, just nodded and changed the subject to something lighter. They talked about Maya's school, about the neighborhood, about the small details of daily life that Elena rarely paid attention to anymore. Maya told elaborate stories about her classmates and her teacher and the class hamster who'd escaped twice last week. And then Timothy found him behind the bookshelf eating someone's eraser, and Mrs. Patterson said we had to be more careful about closing the cage, and I said I would be the cage monitor because I'm very responsible. "You are very responsible," Daniel agreed. "The most responsible," Maya said seriously. After dinner, Maya insisted on showing Elena her favorite movie, an animated film about a robot learning to feel emotions. They sat on the couch together, Maya curled up between the two adults with her stuffed rabbit, providing detailed commentary on every scene. "This is the sad part," she whispered during a moment when the robot was alone. "But it gets happy again. It always gets happy again." Elena felt Daniel's eyes on her and looked over. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something gentle and understanding that made her chest tight. "You okay?" he mouthed. She nodded, even though she wasn't sure it was true. When the movie ended, Maya was drooping with exhaustion. Daniel scooped her up with practiced ease. "Bedtime, sweetheart." "But Elena's still here, and Elena will be here when you say goodnight. Go brush your teeth." Maya trudged off to the bathroom, and Daniel turned to Elena. "You don't have to leave right away if you don't want to. I just need to get her settled. I should probably go anyway. Early day tomorrow." "All right." He hesitated, then added, "But you're welcome to stay if you want company. Sometimes it's nice to just sit with another adult for a while." Elena considered. Her apartment was 20 feet away. Work was waiting. Crisis was waiting. Everything was always waiting. Maybe for a little bit, she said. She helped clean up the dinner dishes while Daniel got Maya ready for bed, falling into an easy rhythm of washing and drying that felt almost meditative. Through the wall, she could hear him reading a bedtime story, his voice gentle and patient as Maya interrupted with questions. When he finally emerged, Elena was sitting on the couch with a second glass of wine, staring at nothing. "She wanted me to tell you good night for her," Daniel said, settling into the chair across from her, "and to remind you that you promised to come back." "I did promise that." "She takes promises very seriously." "So do I." Elena met his eyes. "Or at least I used to. Lately, I'm not sure what I take seriously anymore." Daniel poured himself more wine. "Want to talk about it?" "Not really, but I also don't want to go home and pretend to work for another 4 hours while accomplishing nothing." "Fair enough." He leaned back, completely relaxed. "So we'll just sit here and not talk about work." They did exactly that for a few minutes, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. Elena couldn't remember the last time she'd sat in silence with another person without feeling the need to fill it with networking or strategy or performance. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Sure." "You said you used to design security systems. What happened?" Daniel's expression shifted, something guarded entering his eyes. "That's a long story. I've got time." He studied her for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. Then he said, "I worked for a company called SecureTech about 8 years ago. I was part of the team that developed their flagship security platform, did a lot of the foundational work on access controls and encryption protocols. It was good work, important work. So what changed? My wife got sick." He said it simply, but Elena heard the weight behind the words. Cancer, aggressive and fast-moving. She needed treatment, and I needed flexibility to take care of her and Maya, who was 3 at the time. SecureTech wasn't set up for that kind of flexibility. Tech companies rarely are. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "I asked for remote work options, adjusted hours, anything that would let me keep contributing while being there for my family. They said no. Said the work required in-person collaboration, said I was too valuable to the team to work reduced hours, said they needed my full commitment." Daniel's voice was level, but Elena could hear the old anger beneath it. "So I made a choice. I quit." "And your wife?" "Died 6 months later. By then I'd burned through most of our savings on medical bills, and I had a 3-year-old to support. Tech companies weren't interested in hiring someone who'd walked away from a prestigious position, especially not with the gaps in my resume and the need for flexible hours. So I took what I could get. Maintenance work, manual labor, things I could do on my own schedule while raising Maya." Elena set down her wine glass carefully. "I'm sorry, that's unforgivable." "It's the industry," Daniel said with a shrug. "Tech companies talk about innovation and disruption and changing the world, but most of them can't innovate past the idea that value only comes from people who sacrifice everything else for the job." The words hit Elena like a physical blow because she knew exactly what he was talking about. She'd built TechVista on that same philosophy. Long hours, total commitment, no room for anything that might dilute focus or dedication. How many talented people had she turned away because they needed flexibility? How many had she failed to hire because their resumes showed gaps that suggested other priorities? How many had she lost because the culture she'd created didn't allow for human needs? "What company did you work for before SecureTech?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Different places. Moved around a lot in those early years, looking for the right fit." He paused. "Actually applied to TechVista right after you founded it. Got pretty far in the interview process before they passed." Elena's blood went cold. "When was this?" "About 7 years ago. I was impressed by your vision for what the company could become." Thought it might be different from other tech companies. He smiled without humor. Obviously, it wasn't meant to be. She wanted to ask more questions. What position he'd applied for, who had interviewed him, why he'd been rejected. But she couldn't quite force the words out because she was afraid of what the answers would reveal about the company she'd built and the leader she'd become. "I should go," she said abruptly, standing up. "Elena, thank you for dinner. Tell Maya I said goodnight." She was at the door before Daniel could respond, escaping into the hallway and then into her own apartment, where she closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. Her laptop was where she'd left it on the counter. She opened it with shaking hands and pulled up TechVista's hiring database, searching for Daniel Harper's name. There it was. Application submitted 7 years ago for a senior security engineer position. Resume that showed exactly the kind of innovative thinking and technical expertise she'd needed. Interview notes from her head of engineering at the time, Marcus Chen, before he'd been promoted to CFO. Exceptional technical skills, creative problem solving, would be valuable asset to team. However, flagged in final interview for inflexibility around work hours due to personal commitments. Recommend passing. And below that, her own note from when Marcus had asked her to review the decision. Approved. We need people who can prioritize the work. Elena closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of her expensive apartment, surrounded by all the things her ruthless prioritization had bought her, and finally understood what it had cost. She'd rejected Daniel Harper 7 years ago because he'd needed time for his dying wife and his small daughter. She'd built a company culture that treated human needs as weakness. She'd created exactly the kind of organization that valued systems over people, performance over compassion, results over relationships. And now that same ruthless efficiency was destroying her because the technical problems she couldn't solve required exactly the kind of innovative thinking she'd been rejecting for years. Elena picked up her phone and called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, sounding tired. Elena, it's almost midnight. I need you to pull all the applications we rejected in the company's first 5 years. Everyone who made it to final rounds but didn't get hired. What? Why? Because I think we've been making the wrong decisions about people for a very long time, and I need to know who we missed. Marcus was quiet for a moment. This is about more than the current crisis, isn't it? Just pull the records, Marcus. I'll explain tomorrow. She hung up and sat in the darkness, thinking about locked doors and broken systems, and the fundamental question of whether you could rebuild a foundation while the building was still standing on it. Outside her window, Brooklyn stretched out in all directions, millions of lives being lived in ways she'd never taken time to notice. Somewhere in this building, a little girl was sleeping with a stuffed rabbit, dreaming whatever 7-year-olds dreamed, and her father was probably sitting in his modest apartment, wondering what he'd said to send Elena running. She picked up her phone again and typed a message. I'm sorry for leaving so abruptly. Thank you for trusting me with your story. It means more than you know. The response came a few minutes later. No apology needed. Some truths are hard to hear, but they're still worth hearing. Elena stared at those words for a long time. Then she opened her laptop again and began working on something that had nothing to do with crisis management or damage control or saving her reputation. She started writing a list of names, people who'd been rejected, people who'd been overlooked, people like Daniel Harper who'd had the expertise her company needed, but also had the audacity to want lives outside of work. She didn't know what she was going to do with the list yet, but for the first time since the crisis began, she felt like she was working on something that might actually matter. The locked door had been the beginning, but what came next would require opening doors she'd spent years keeping closed. Not just in her company, but in herself. And she was finally ready to try. By 3 a.m, Elena had compiled a list of 47 names. 47 people who'd been qualified, capable, and ultimately rejected because they didn't fit the mold of total availability that TechVista demanded. Parents who needed flexible schedules, people caring for elderly relatives, individuals managing chronic health conditions, anyone whose life included responsibilities beyond the office. She stared at the names until her vision blurred, then forced herself to close the laptop and try to sleep. But her mind wouldn't stop churning through possibilities and implications and the growing certainty that she'd built something fundamentally flawed. When her alarm went off at 6, Elena felt like she hadn't slept at all. She dragged herself through her morning routine and arrived at the office before most of her team, going straight to Marcus's office. He was already there, looking as exhausted as she felt, with the files she'd requested spread across his desk. I pulled everything you asked for, he said without preamble. Elena, what's this about? She closed the door and sat down across from him. I think we've been solving the wrong problem. What do you mean? Everyone keeps telling me we need better security protocols, more rigorous testing, stricter oversight, but those are all symptoms. The actual problem is that we don't have the right people doing the work because we've systematically excluded anyone who doesn't fit a narrow definition of commitment. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. This is about more than hiring practices. It's about everything: the culture we've built, the values we've prioritized, the people we've pushed away. Elena pulled Daniel's file from the stack. This man applied 7 years ago. He'd done foundational work on security systems for SecureTech. He had exactly the expertise we needed. We rejected him because he needed flexible hours to care for his dying wife. I remember that interview, Marcus said quietly. I wanted to hire him. You overruled me. The words stung, but Elena didn't flinch. I did. Because I believed dedication meant sacrificing everything else. And I was wrong. So what are you proposing? I want to reach back out to everyone on this list. Offer them consulting positions with flexible arrangements. Show them we've changed, that we understand value doesn't only come from people who can work 80-hour weeks. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The board will never approve this. Richard and Victoria are already calling for your resignation. This will look like desperation. It is desperation, Elena said. But it's also the right thing to do. And maybe those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. Elena, I know the risks. I know how this looks. But I can't keep doing the same things and expecting different results. Something has to change, Marcus. It might as well start with me. He studied her face, and she saw the moment he decided to trust her. All right, I'll support this. But we need a strategy. We can't just cold call 47 people we rejected years ago and expect them to want to help us. I know. That's why I'm starting with one person. If I can convince him, maybe I can convince the others. Marcus glanced at the file still in her hands. Daniel Harper, the one from the security systems background. He lives in my building. We've talked a few times. That's convenient. It's complicated, Elena said. But yes, I'm hoping he'll at least hear me out. She spent the rest of the morning preparing her approach, trying to find words that would convey sincerity without sounding manipulative. By noon, she'd written and deleted a dozen different messages. Finally, she settled on something simple. Daniel, this is Elena. I know this is unexpected, but I'd like to talk to you about a professional matter. Would you have time to meet for coffee? His response came an hour later. I have about 45 minutes free this afternoon around 3. There's a coffee shop on the corner of 5th and Union. That work for you? Elena confirmed and spent the next 2 hours alternating between reviewing security reports and rehearsing what she wanted to say. Nothing sounded right. Everything felt either too formal or too personal, too strategic or too desperate. At 10 minutes to 3, she left the office and walked to the coffee shop Daniel had suggested. It was a small, worn place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, the kind of neighborhood spot that survived on regulars rather than passing traffic. Daniel was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of black coffee. He'd changed from his maintenance clothes into jeans and a button-down shirt, and Elena realized with a start that this was the first time she'd seen him outside the context of their apartment building. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "You said it was professional. I'm curious what a tech CEO wants with a maintenance worker." There was no hostility in his voice, just honest curiosity. Elena ordered coffee she didn't want from a server who looked barely old enough to work, then turned back to Daniel. "I looked you up in our hiring database last night," she said. "After you told me you'd applied to TechVista, I found your application, your interview notes, everything." Daniel's expression didn't change. And I saw that you made it all the way to final rounds, that our head of engineering wanted to hire you, that I personally overruled that decision because you needed flexible hours." "I remember." "I was wrong," Elena said. The words felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar. "I rejected you because I believed anyone who couldn't prioritize work above everything else wasn't truly committed. I built a company culture around that belief. And now that culture is destroying us because we don't have people with the expertise and creativity to solve our biggest problems." Daniel took a sip of his coffee, his face unreadable. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to fix it. Not just for TechVista, but because it's the right thing to do. I've been reviewing all the candidates we rejected over the years, and I'm seeing a pattern of excluding talented people for reasons that have nothing to do with their actual capabilities. And you want to hire them now. I want to offer consulting arrangements, flexible hours, remote work options, compensation that reflects their expertise, a chance to prove that we can do better. Daniel set down his coffee cup carefully. That's a nice speech, Elena, but let me ask you something. Are you doing this because you genuinely want to change your company's culture, or because you're in crisis mode and need a quick fix? The question hit hard because Elena wasn't entirely sure of the answer herself. Both, she admitted. I won't lie to you, we're in trouble. The security vulnerabilities we're facing are real, and we need help solving them. But working on that list last night, reading through all those applications from people I dismissed without really seeing them, it changed something for me. What did it change? The way I understand what value looks like, what commitment means, what kind of leader I want to be. She met his eyes. I can't undo rejecting your application 7 years ago. I can't give you back the time you lost or make up for the opportunities that closed because of decisions I made. But I can offer you something now. A consulting role focused on our security infrastructure. Set your own hours, work remotely if you want. Bring whatever perspective and expertise you're willing to share. Why me specifically? Because you understand these systems from the ground up. Because you've been on the outside looking in and you know what's wrong with how companies like mine operate. And because I trust you. Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. You barely know me, Elena. We've had dinner once and a few conversations in a hallway. I know that you fixed my lock without asking for anything in return. I know that you're raising an incredible daughter while working jobs that don't challenge you intellectually because you're prioritizing what actually matters. I know that you could be bitter about how the industry treated you, but instead you've built a life that has real meaning. Elena leaned forward. And I know that when I asked you about security systems the other night, you lit up in a way that told me you miss this work. You miss solving complex problems. You miss using your mind for more than troubleshooting broken toilets. The words hung between them. Daniel's expression had shifted during her speech, something vulnerable entering his eyes. You're not wrong, he said quietly. I do miss it. Every time I hear about some new security breakthrough or read about systems I used to work on, there's this ache of wanting to be part of it again. But wanting something doesn't mean it's possible. Why not? Because I have a 7-year-old daughter who needs me home for dinner and bedtime. Because I can't go back to the kind of work that demands everything and leaves nothing for the rest of life. Because I already tried that path and watched what it cost. I'm not asking you to go back to that path, Elena said. I'm offering a different one. Work the hours that fit your life. Contribute what you can when you can. Be compensated fairly for the value you provide, not for the face time you log in an office. Daniel studied her for a long moment. And when your board finds out you're hiring a maintenance worker as a security consultant? When your investors ask why you're paying premium rates for someone who can only work limited hours? What then? Then I explained that expertise doesn't come with an employment history requirement. That innovation happens when we bring in perspectives we've been excluding. That maybe the traditional way of doing things is exactly what got us into this mess. That's a risky position for someone whose job is already on the line. Everything's risky right now, Elena said. I can play it safe and probably still lose, or I can try something different and maybe actually fix what's broken. The server returned with Elena's coffee. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, waiting for Daniel's response. I need to think about it, he said finally. This isn't a small decision. If I do this and it doesn't work out, I'm back to square one. But this time everyone will know I tried and failed. Fair enough. Take whatever time you need. I'll give you an answer in a few days. He stood to leave, then paused. Elena, can I ask you something? Of course. If we'd had this conversation 7 years ago, before you rejected my application, would you have made a different decision? The question struck at something fundamental. Elena wanted to say yes, wanted to believe she would have seen past the rigid requirements and recognized real value, but honesty mattered more than comfort. Probably not, she admitted. 7 years ago, I was too sure I knew the right way to build a company, too convinced that my vision was the only one that mattered. I would have seen your need for flexibility as a weakness, not as a sign of your priorities being aligned with what actually matters in life.
What changed? Elena thought about a storm-soaked night, about a little girl offering cookies and comfort, about standing in her empty apartment and finally understanding what all her success had cost. I got locked out, she said, and someone showed me that sometimes the things we think are weaknesses are actually the most important strengths we have. Daniel's expression softened. I'll think about your offer. And Elena? Thank you for being honest. That matters more than you might think. He left the coffee shop, and Elena sat alone with cooling coffee and racing thoughts. She didn't know if Daniel would accept. She didn't know if this idea would work or if it would blow up in her face spectacularly. But she knew she'd done something she rarely allowed herself to do. She'd been completely honest about her failures and her hopes without trying to control the outcome. That evening, Elena worked late again, but this time she was focused on something concrete. She drafted a proposal for the board, outlining her plan to bring in specialized consultants with flexible arrangements. She built financial models showing how targeted expertise could be more cost-effective than full-time hires. She prepared answers for every objection she could anticipate. Marcus reviewed the proposal around 8 and called her immediately. This is good work, Elena. Really good. But you know Richard and Victoria will tear it apart anyway. Let them. I'm tired of making decisions based on what will appease people who want me to fail regardless of what I do. That's a bold stance for someone trying to keep her job. Maybe keeping my job isn't the most important thing anymore, Elena said, and was surprised by how true it felt. She left the office around 9 and stopped at a small market near her building, picking up ingredients she couldn't name with any certainty. Cooking was a skill she'd never developed, always too busy for anything that couldn't be microwaved or ordered from expensive restaurants. But she wanted to try. Back at her apartment, she attempted to make pasta sauce from a recipe she found online. It was harder than it looked. She burned the garlic, oversalted the tomatoes, and somehow managed to splatter red sauce across her previously spotless kitchen. But the final result was edible, and there was something deeply satisfying about creating something with her own hands. She was eating her imperfect dinner when someone knocked on her door. Maya stood in the hallway in her star pajamas, holding Snowflake and looking concerned. "Are you okay?" the little girl asked. "I heard banging, and Daddy said maybe you were cooking, but I wanted to make sure you were okay because cooking can be dangerous if you don't know how." Elena couldn't help but smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just learning how to cook. It's messier than I expected. Daddy says cooking is like science, but with eating at the end." Maya peered past her into the apartment. "Did you make something good?" "I made something edible. Want to come taste it and tell me if it's actually good?" Maya looked back toward her own apartment, where Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Sorry," he said. She was worried about the noise. "It's fine. I was just offering her some truly mediocre pasta sauce as thanks for checking on me." "Can I, Daddy? Please?" Daniel met Elena's eyes, and she saw the question there. Was she sure about this? She nodded. "Okay, but just for a minute. It's past your bedtime." Maya darted into Elena's apartment and climbed onto one of the kitchen counter stools, surveying the disaster zone with interest. "Wow, you made a really big mess. That means you were working hard." "I definitely worked hard," Elena agreed. She scooped a small amount of sauce into a bowl and handed Maya a spoon. The girl tasted it carefully, her expression serious. Then she smiled. "It's good. It's not as good as Daddy's sauce, but it's good for a first time." High praise indeed. Daniel had followed Maya inside and was looking at the sauce-splattered kitchen with barely concealed amusement. "This is what happens when you try to cook and answer work emails at the same time, isn't it?" "How did you know?" "Because your laptop is open on the counter with sauce on the keyboard." Elena looked and saw he was right. "Oh no, that's my work laptop." Rice might save it, or it might not. Technology and tomato sauce aren't great friends. This is a metaphor for something, isn't it? Probably for trying to do too many things at once, instead of focusing on one thing and doing it well. Maya had finished her sample and was now examining the various ingredients Elena had left scattered across the counter. "You should cook with Daddy sometime. He's really good at teaching. He taught me how to make cookies and scrambled eggs and grilled cheese. I'm sure your dad is very busy." "Actually," Daniel said, his tone carefully neutral. "I've been thinking about your offer, and I have some questions."
Elena felt her heart rate pick up. I'm happy to answer them. Not tonight. Maya needs to get to bed, and these aren't quick questions. He paused. But maybe we could talk this weekend. I have Saturday morning free before Maya's soccer game. I'd like that. Good. He scooped up his daughter, who protested that she wasn't tired even as she yawned. Come on, troublemaker. Say goodnight to Elena. Good night, Elena. Come to my soccer game on Saturday. I'm a defender, and I'm very good at not letting the other team score. I'll try to be there, Elena promised, surprising herself. After they left, she cleaned up the kitchen disaster, threw away the laptop she'd destroyed through inattention, and sat down to continue working on her tablet. But her mind kept drifting to the conversation ahead with Daniel, to the possibility that he might actually accept her offer, to the look on Maya's face when she'd tasted the sauce and declared it good for a first time. Good for a first time. Not perfect, but good enough. An acceptable beginning rather than an impossible standard. When had Elena forgotten that growth required imperfection? That learning meant making mistakes? That sometimes good enough was actually good? The next morning brought another crisis. One of TechVista's major clients had officially terminated their contract, citing security concerns and lack of confidence in leadership. The stock price dropped another 12%. Richard Bauer called an emergency board meeting for Monday morning, and Elena knew exactly what that meeting would be about. They were going to try to force her out. She spent Friday in back-to-back meetings with her executive team, her legal counsel, and Marcus, who looked more worried than she'd ever seen him. Richard has the votes, he said bluntly. Unless you can give them something concrete by Monday, something that demonstrates real progress, they're going to remove you as CEO. I know. Do you have a plan? I'm working on one. Elena, I know what's at stake, Marcus. I built this company from nothing. I'm not going to let it go without a fight. But I'm also not going to compromise on doing what's right just to appease people who've already decided I'm the problem. Marcus studied her for a long moment. You've changed. These last few weeks, you're different. Is that good or bad? I'm not sure yet, but it's definitely different. Elena left the office late Friday evening, her mind churning with scenarios and strategies. She needed something that would convince the board she could turn things around. She needed proof that her new approach could work. She needed Daniel to say yes. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. Elena dressed in jeans and a sweater, the closest thing she owned to casual clothing, and met Daniel at the same coffee shop where they'd talked before. He looked tired but determined, with a folder of papers tucked under his arm. I've been reviewing TechVista's security architecture, he said after they'd ordered. Based on what's publicly available and what I remember from when I worked in the industry. And Elena, your problems are worse than you think. Her stomach dropped. How much worse? The vulnerabilities your team identified are real, but they're not the core issue. Your entire system is built on a foundation that's outdated by about 5 years. You've been patching and updating, but you're patching a structure that was flawed from the beginning. Tell me something I don't know. Here's what you don't know. It's fixable. Not easily and not quickly, but it's fixable. He opened the folder and pulled out detailed technical diagrams that looked like they'd taken hours to create. I mapped out what a rebuild would look like. Not a complete teardown, but a strategic reconstruction that preserves what's working while replacing what isn't. Elena studied the diagrams, trying to follow the logic. How long would this take? With a dedicated team and proper resources. 6 months for the critical infrastructure, another 6 to fully integrate and test. But you'd see measurable improvement within the first few weeks. And you could lead this? Daniel was quiet for a moment. That's what I've been trying to decide. Whether I could do this work the way it needs to be done while still being the father Maya needs me to be. What did you decide? That I want to try, but I have conditions. Name them. I work from home most days, coming into the office only when absolutely necessary. I'm available from 9 to 3 on weekdays, with flexibility for school events and emergencies. No evening meetings, no weekend work unless there's a genuine crisis. And Maya comes first, always. If she needs me, I'm there, regardless of what's happening at work. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. These weren't unreasonable demands.
They were basic human needs being stated as if they were negotiable because the industry had taught him they were. Done, she said. All of it. Non-negotiable. There's more. I want equity in the company. Not a huge amount, but enough that I have a stake in making this work long term. And I want a formal role on your team, not just a consulting arrangement that can be terminated whenever it becomes inconvenient. Director of Security Infrastructure, equity package comparable to other director-level positions. Contract that includes the flexibility clauses you outlined. Daniel blinked. You're agreeing to everything. Because everything you're asking for is reasonable. The fact that it feels extraordinary says more about how broken the industry is than about your requests. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. This is really happening. If you want it to be, yes. I need to talk to Maya, make sure she understands what this means. But Elena, if I do this, I'm all in. I'll give you everything I have within the boundaries we've set, but I won't compromise on those boundaries. I wouldn't want you to. Those boundaries are part of what makes you valuable. You know what actually matters. They spent the next hour discussing logistics, technical details, and how to present this to the board. Daniel's expertise was evident in every word, every suggestion. This was someone who understood systems not just mechanically, but philosophically, who could see not just what was broken, but why. When they finally left the coffee shop, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Maya's soccer game starts at 11, Daniel said. You're welcome to come if you want. Fair warning, it's 7-year-olds playing soccer, which means it's basically adorable chaos. I wouldn't miss it, Elena said. The soccer field was a mess of small children in oversized jerseys chasing a ball with more enthusiasm than skill. Elena stood on the sideline next to Daniel, watching Maya defend her goal with fierce determination. She's good, Elena observed. She's scrappy, doesn't have the most natural talent, but she works harder than anyone else out there. Pride colored Daniel's voice. Reminds me of someone I know. Elena glanced at him. Are you comparing me to your 7-year-old daughter? Take it as the compliment it's meant to be. Maya doesn't give up, even when things are hard. She figures out what needs to be done and she does it, regardless of what anyone else thinks. He smiled. Sound familiar? Before Elena could respond, Maya intercepted a pass and kicked the ball powerfully downfield. The small crowd of parents cheered and Maya turned to wave at them, nearly getting run over by an opposing player in the process. Eyes on the ball, sweetheart, Daniel called out, laughing. Elena watched the game, really watched it, present in the moment rather than thinking about work or strategy or crisis management. She saw the joy on Maya's face when her team scored, the easy camaraderie among the parents on the sideline, the simple pleasure of being outside on a beautiful morning doing something that mattered to the people you cared about. When was the last time she'd done something like this? When had she last been part of a community that wasn't built around professional networking or strategic advantage? She couldn't remember. After the game, which Maya's team won by a single goal, they went for pizza at a family restaurant that was loud and chaotic and nothing like the places Elena usually ate. Maya recounted every moment of the game in exhaustive detail, complete with dramatic reenactments using the salt and pepper shakers. And then I blocked Julie's kick, even though she's really good, and Coach Sarah said I played great defense, and then we scored and I wanted to help, but I had to stay back because that's my job. And then, breathe, Maya, Daniel said with amusement. I'm too excited to breathe. Elena found herself laughing, really laughing, not the polite laughter she produced at networking events, but genuine amusement at this ebullient child who approached everything with such wholehearted enthusiasm. Can Elena come to my game next week too? Maya asked. That's up to Elena, Daniel said. I'd love to, Elena heard herself say. She meant it. Somewhere in the last week, these two people had become important to her in a way that had nothing to do with business strategy or crisis management. They'd become friends. Maybe more than friends. That evening, Elena prepared for Monday's board meeting. She had Daniel's technical proposal, his commitment to join the team, and a clear plan for addressing TechVista's security vulnerabilities. She had proof that her new approach could work, that bringing in expertise with flexible arrangements could solve problems her traditional hiring hadn't. But she also had something else, a growing understanding that success wasn't just about saving the company. It was about building something worth saving. A place where people like Daniel could contribute their expertise without sacrificing what mattered most. A culture that valued innovation and integrity over blind loyalty and endless availability. Whether the board would give her the chance to build that remained to be seen. But Elena was finally clear about what she was fighting for, and that clarity, more than any strategy or proposal, gave her the strength to face whatever Monday would bring. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Elena dressed in her most expensive suit, armor against what she knew was coming, and arrived at TechVista's headquarters an hour before the board meeting. Marcus was already in her office, looking like he hadn't slept. "Tell me you have something," he said without preamble. Elena handed him Daniel's proposal. "I have this, and I have Daniel Harper starting today as Director of Security Infrastructure." Marcus's eyes widened as he scanned the documents. "You moved fast." "I didn't have time to move slow." "Is he here yet?" "He's in the lobby. Security doesn't have him cleared for building access yet." "Fix that. I want him in this meeting." "Elena, bringing an unknown into a board meeting where they're planning to remove you as CEO is exactly what I need to do. They want proof I can solve our problems. He is that proof." Marcus studied her face, then nodded. "I'll get him cleared. But Elena, you should know that Richard brought his own security consultant, someone from Cyberforce Solutions." Elena's stomach went cold. Cyberforce was one of their biggest competitors, known for aggressive business tactics and hostile takeovers disguised as partnerships. Why would Richard bring someone from Cyberforce? "I think he's positioning an alternative to your leadership. Bring in outside expertise, push you out, restructure the company." "That's not consultation, that's a coup." "That's Richard." Marcus headed for the door. "I'll get Daniel up here. You prepare for war." Elena spent the next 40 minutes reviewing her presentation, running through scenarios, preparing for every possible attack. When Daniel finally appeared in her doorway, dressed in a suit that looked borrowed and slightly uncomfortable, she felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You're paying me to be here. I should probably thank you." He gestured at the suit. "I had to borrow this from a friend. It's been a while since I needed professional clothing." "You look good. Nervous?" "Terrified, actually. It's been 7 years since I sat in a room full of executives. I'd forgotten how much I don't miss it." "If this goes badly, you can go back to maintenance work and forget this ever happened." Daniel met her eyes. "And if it goes well, then we rebuild everything, starting from the foundation up." The conference room was already full when they entered. Richard Bauer sat at one end of the table with Victoria Hastings beside him, both looking confident and predatory. The other board members were scattered around the table, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to openly hostile. And sitting next to Richard was a man in an expensive suit who radiated corporate aggression. "Elena," Richard said with false warmth, "I see you've brought a guest. How unexpected." "This is Daniel Harper, our new Director of Security Infrastructure. He'll be presenting our plan for addressing the company's security vulnerabilities." "I'm afraid we've already arranged for expert consultation." Richard gestured to the man beside him. "This is Thomas Crane from Cyberforce Solutions. He's reviewed TechVista's situation and has some recommendations." Elena sat down, Daniel beside her, Marcus on her other side. "I'm sure Mr. Crane's recommendations are valuable, but I'd like to present our internal solution first." "Internal solution?" Victoria's tone was skeptical. "Elena, we're past the point of internal solutions. We need outside expertise." "We have outside expertise. Daniel spent 8 years designing security systems for SecureTech and contributed to foundational work that the entire industry still uses. He brings exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need." Thomas Crane spoke for the first time, his voice smooth and condescending. "With all due respect, Ms. Cruz, I've reviewed Mr. Harper's background. His last position in the tech industry was 7 years ago. The landscape has changed significantly since then. I'm not sure maintenance work keeps one current on cutting-edge security protocols." Elena felt Daniel tense beside her, but his voice was calm when he responded. "You're right that the landscape has changed, but fundamental principles haven't. Security isn't just about the latest protocols. It's about understanding how systems think, where vulnerabilities emerge, and why problems happen in the first place." "That's a nice theory," Thomas said dismissively. "In practice, TechVista needs someone who understands current market demands and can implement proven solutions quickly." What you mean is Tech Vista needs someone who will recommend outsourcing their entire security infrastructure to Cyberforce, Daniel said quietly, which would make your company very wealthy and leave Tech Vista completely dependent on external vendors. The room went silent. Richard's expression hardened. That's quite an accusation, Mr. Harper. It's not an accusation, it's an observation. Your consultant works for a company that profits from other companies' security failures. That's a significant conflict of interest. At least Cyberforce has a track record of success, Victoria interjected. What track record do you have, Mr. Harper? Besides being rejected from this company 7 years ago? Elena started to speak, but Daniel touched her arm lightly, asking permission to continue. She nodded. You're right, Ms. Hastings. I was rejected 7 years ago because I needed flexible hours to care for my dying wife and my young daughter. Tech Vista decided that made me uncommitted. Other companies made similar decisions. So I did maintenance work because it let me be the father my daughter needed while still supporting us financially. His voice remained steady, but Elena heard the steel beneath it. I don't regret those choices. But this industry should regret a culture that treats human needs as incompatible with professional excellence. This is very touching, Richard said, but we're here to discuss Tech Vista's future, not Mr. Harper's personal history. My personal history is relevant because it represents exactly what's wrong with Tech Vista's approach, Daniel replied. You've built a culture that excludes anyone who can't dedicate every waking hour to work. That means you're missing out on talented people who have responsibilities outside the office, people who bring diverse perspectives and creative solutions because they understand life beyond quarterly earnings. And you think bringing in a bunch of part-time workers is going to save this company? Victoria's skepticism was palpable. I think bringing in people who are allowed to have lives outside work will create better solutions than people who are burned out and exhausted from being available 24/7. Daniel pulled out his technical diagrams. But let's talk specifics. I've mapped out Tech Vista's security infrastructure based on publicly available information and industry knowledge. Your core problem isn't the vulnerabilities your team identified. Those are symptoms. The real problem is that your foundational architecture is outdated and was poorly designed from the start. He spread the diagrams across the table. Elena watched the board members lean in, drawn despite their skepticism. This is your current system, Daniel explained, pointing to a complex web of interconnected components. It's built on a hub-and-spoke model that made sense 10 years ago, but creates massive vulnerability points today. If someone compromises your central hub, they have access to everything. Your team has been trying to reinforce the spokes, but that doesn't address the fundamental weakness of having a single point of failure. Thomas Crane interrupted. That's a gross oversimplification. Tech Vista's architecture includes multiple redundancies and redundancies that all route back through the same central authentication system, Daniel said calmly, which is exactly where the vulnerabilities your clients are worried about exist. I'm not oversimplifying. I'm identifying the root cause that your patches aren't addressing. And you have a solution? Richard's tone was challenging. I have a proposal for a distributed authentication model that eliminates single points of failure while maintaining system efficiency. It would take approximately 6 months to fully implement, with measurable improvements visible within the first month. He walked them through the technical details with a clarity that made complex concepts accessible. Elena watched the board members' expressions shift from skepticism to interest, saw them asking questions that suggested genuine engagement rather than automatic dismissal. Even Richard looked intrigued, though he clearly didn't want to be. This is all very interesting in theory, Thomas Crane said when Daniel finished, but implementation is where theories fall apart. You'd need a team of specialists working full-time to make this happen. One person working part-time can't manage a project of this scope. You're right, Daniel agreed. That's why this isn't a one-person project. Elena has been reviewing candidates Tech Vista rejected over the years. People with exceptional expertise who needed flexible arrangements that the company wasn't willing to provide. We bring them back as consultants, build a team that represents the best talent available rather than just the people willing to sacrifice everything else for work. That's a huge risk, Victoria said, building a team of people who aren't committed to being here full-time. With respect, Ms. Hastings, that's exactly backward, Daniel said. People who have lives outside work are often more committed because they understand what they're working for. They're not here because they have nothing else. They're here because they choose to be, because the work matters, and because they're valued for what they contribute, not for how many hours they're visible in the office. Marcus spoke up for the first time. I've reviewed Daniel's proposal in detail. The cost analysis shows we could implement this for roughly 40% less than outsourcing to a company like Cyberforce, with the added benefit of building internal expertise rather than becoming dependent on external vendors. And if it fails? Richard challenged. If Mr. Harper's untested approach doesn't work and we lose more clients? Then you'll have my resignation, Elena said. Not forced out by a vote, but voluntary acknowledgement that I made the wrong call. But I believe this approach will work because it addresses not just the technical problems, but the cultural ones that created them. Culture doesn't matter if the company fails, Victoria said sharply. Culture is exactly why companies fail, Elena countered. We built TechVista on the assumption that success required total sacrifice, that attracted people willing to make that sacrifice, but it also excluded people who might have prevented the problems we're facing now. Daniel's right. We need to change not just our systems, but our approach to who we value and why. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying Elena with calculating eyes. This is quite a reversal from the woman who spent 15 years building a company on ruthless efficiency and unwavering focus. People change, Richard. Sometimes they have to. Or sometimes they get desperate and make reckless decisions that sound good but destroy everything they've built. The room fell silent. Elena felt the weight of every choice she'd made over the past 15 years, every person she'd rejected, every opportunity she'd missed because she'd been too convinced of her own rightness to consider alternatives. You might be right, she said quietly. This might fail, but I'd rather fail trying something different than succeed by continuing to do things that I now know are wrong. Noble sentiments, Thomas Crane said, but boards don't run on nobility. They run on results and accountability. Then let's talk about accountability, Daniel said. He pulled out another document. I did some research on Cyberforce solutions over the weekend. In the last 3 years, you've consulted for 8 companies facing security crises. 6 of those companies are now wholly owned subsidiaries of Cyberforce or have sold their security divisions to you at significantly reduced valuations. The other 2 are still struggling with ongoing security problems despite your consultation. Thomas's expression went cold. Those companies chose to partner with Cyberforce because we offered comprehensive solutions. You offered takeovers disguised as partnerships. And judging by Richard's eager involvement in bringing you here, I'm guessing the plan was similar for TechVista. Richard stood abruptly. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Harper. I hope you have evidence. I have pattern recognition and basic logic. You've been pushing for Elena's removal for months. You bring in a consultant from a company known for acquiring struggling tech firms. You position this as saving TechVista when it's actually positioning it for sale. Daniel's voice remained calm. I'm not accusing you of anything illegal. I'm just pointing out that your recommended solution benefits you personally more than it benefits TechVista or its employees. This is outrageous, Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus pulled out his own folder. Actually, it's documented. Richard, you filed disclosure forms last month showing a significant financial interest in Cyberforce. You're supposed to recuse yourself from decisions where you have conflicts of interest. The room erupted. Board members demanded explanations. Richard started making excuses. Thomas Crane tried to redirect the conversation. Victoria looked between them with growing horror as she realized she'd been used. Through it all, Elena sat quietly, watching the chaos unfold. She met Daniel's eyes and saw the same calm assessment. This was the moment. Either the board would see through Richard's manipulation, or they would close ranks and push her out anyway. The oldest board member, Gerald Santos, finally stood. He'd been silent through the entire meeting, just listening and observing. Enough, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. Richard, you're recused from this vote and any further discussions about TechVista's security infrastructure. If you have financial interests in Cyberforce, you should have disclosed them immediately. He turned to Thomas Crane. Thank you for your time, Mr. Crane, but we won't be needing your services. Thomas started to protest, but Gerald cut him off with a look. The consultant gathered his materials and left, Richard following him out with Victoria trailing behind uncertainly. When the door closed, Gerald looked at Elena. That was quite a performance, both of you. It wasn't a performance, Elena said. It was the truth. The truth is that this company is in crisis, and you're proposing an untested solution built on flexible work arrangements and rejected candidates. That's a hell of a gamble, Elena. It is. But it's a gamble based on valuing people's expertise rather than their availability. And I think that's a bet worth making. Gerald studied Daniel. You really think you can fix this? I think I can lead a team that can fix it, yes. But I need support from leadership and the freedom to bring in the right people, even if they don't fit traditional molds. And you need all these flexible arrangements, the remote work, the limited hours. I have a 7-year-old daughter who lost her mother 3 years ago. I'm the only parent she has. So yes, I need those arrangements because I refuse to sacrifice her well-being for any job, no matter how important. Daniel's voice was steady. But I promise you that within the hours I work, I'll give you everything I have, and I'll build a team of people who do the same. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked around at the remaining board members. I want a vote. All in favor of giving Elena 6 months to implement Daniel's proposal with monthly progress reviews and the understanding that failure means voluntary resignation? Hands went up slowly around the table. Marcus immediately. Gerald himself. 2 others. That was 4 votes. They needed 5 for a majority. The last holdout was James Chen, a venture capitalist who'd been quietly skeptical of Elena for years. He looked at her, at Daniel, at the technical diagram still spread across the table. 6 months, he said finally, but I want detailed weekly reports, and the first sign that this isn't working, we revisit the leadership question. Agreed, Elena said. His hand went up. 5 votes. A majority. Elena felt something in her chest loosen, not relief exactly, but a sense that she'd bought time. Time to prove that a different way was possible. Gerald stood. Meeting adjourned. Elena, I hope you know what you're doing. So do I, Gerald. So do I. The board members filed out, leaving Elena, Marcus, and Daniel alone in the conference room. Holy hell, Marcus said quietly. I thought we were done. We almost were, Elena agreed. She looked at Daniel. You didn't tell me you'd researched Cyberforce. You didn't ask. But when you mentioned Richard's consultant, I got curious. It took most of Sunday, but the pattern was pretty clear once I started looking. You could have led with that information instead of presenting your proposal first. And let them dismiss both of us without hearing the actual plan? Number. Better to establish credibility first, then reveal the conflict of interest. Basic strategy. Elena couldn't help but smile. You're good at this. I used to be. Guess it comes back with practice. Marcus gathered up his papers. I'm going to go do damage control with the remaining board members. Make sure they don't have second thoughts. You two should probably get started on actually implementing this plan. You just convinced everyone to support. After he left, Elena and Daniel stood in the empty conference room, the magnitude of what they'd just committed to settling over them. Are you okay? Daniel asked. I should be asking you that. You just walked into a hostile boardroom and called out a venture capitalist on corruption in your first day on the job. He made it easy, but yeah, I'm okay. Terrified, but okay. He looked at her seriously. Elena, what we promised in there, building this team, implementing these changes, that's going to be hard, really hard. We're going to face resistance at every level. I know. And I meant what I said about my boundaries. If this starts affecting Maya, if she needs me and I can't be there because of work, I'm out, no matter how important the project is. I wouldn't want you to compromise on that. Those boundaries are part of what makes you valuable. Daniel smiled slightly. You keep saying that. I'm starting to believe you might mean it. I do mean it. And Daniel, thank you for taking this risk, for trusting me enough to walk into that room and fight for something you stopped believing the industry could provide. Thank you for giving me a reason to believe again. They left the conference room and headed to Elena's office, where they spent the rest of the day beginning the work of building something new. Daniel made lists of technical requirements and potential team members. Elena started reaching out to the candidates they'd rejected over the years. people whose expertise they desperately needed and whose circumstances they'd previously dismissed. Some conversations were easy, people who'd been waiting for a chance to get back into the industry, who jumped at the opportunity. Others were harder, people who'd been burned by tech company promises before, who needed convincing that this time would be different. By late afternoon, they'd secured commitments from 5 specialists: a systems architect who worked part-time while caring for her elderly parents, a security analyst who needed accommodations for a chronic health condition, a data specialist who'd left the industry to raise adopted children, a programmer who'd been pushed out for requesting mental health support, and a network engineer who'd been rejected for being too old. "This is a good team," Daniel said, reviewing the names. "Really good. If we can get them working together effectively, we have a real shot at fixing this." If being the operative word. Always is. But Elena, I've been thinking about something you said in the board meeting, about changing culture, not just systems. What about it? Culture change doesn't happen because leadership announces new values. It happens because leadership demonstrates them consistently, especially when it's difficult. These people we're bringing in, they're going to be watching to see if you mean what you say about flexibility and work-life balance. The first time you push someone to work late or question their commitment because they leave for a kid's school event, we lose all credibility. Elena nodded slowly. "You're right. So how do we make sure that doesn't happen?" By building in accountability, not just for them, but for you. And for me. We set clear expectations about availability and respect them absolutely. We measure performance by results, not by hours logged. We celebrate people who maintain boundaries, not just people who sacrifice everything. That's going to feel strange. For everyone. We're all conditioned by what the industry taught us about what commitment looks like. But strange doesn't mean wrong. They worked until 6, when Daniel packed up his laptop and stood to leave. "Maya's expecting me home for dinner," he said. "We're having taco night, which is basically controlled chaos with ground beef and cheese. Sounds fun." "It is. You're welcome to join us if you want. Though I should warn you, Maya's going to ask you approximately 700 questions about your day." Elena looked at the work still spread across her desk, the emails still demanding responses, the fires still needing to be put out. Then she looked at Daniel, who was offering her something simple and real. Dinner with people who cared about her for who she was, not what she could do for them. "I'd love that," she said. "Let me just send a few quick emails. Take your time. We're not eating until 7 anyway." 20 minutes later, Elena found herself in Daniel's apartment, helping Maya set the table while he cooked. The little girl was full of news about her day at school and excited to show Elena a drawing she'd made of their soccer game. "That's you on the sideline," Maya explained, pointing to a stick figure in what might have been a dress or might have been a very long shirt. "You were there, so I drew you. Next time you should wear something more colorful so you're easier to draw." "I'll keep that in mind." Dinner was exactly the controlled chaos Daniel had promised. Maya insisted on building her taco in a very specific order that nevertheless resulted in everything falling apart when she tried to eat it. Daniel told stories about his day that made complicated technical concepts sound like adventures. Elena found herself laughing more than she had in months. "Daddy said you had a really big meeting today," Maya said, cheese from her reconstructed taco stuck to her chin. "Was it scary?" "A little bit, yes." "But Daddy was there with you, right? So it was okay?" Elena glanced at Daniel, who was watching his daughter with that mixture of love and amusement that seemed to be his default expression around her. "Yes," Elena said. "Your dad was there and he was amazing. He's really good at his job." "I know. He's good at everything except cooking vegetables. His vegetables are always mushy." "Maya," Daniel said with exaggerated hurt, "I thought we agreed not to tell people about the mushy vegetables." "But they are mushy, Daddy. You have to accept the truth." Elena laughed at the serious expression on Maya's face, at the way Daniel surrendered with theatrical despair, at the easy warmth between them. This was what family looked like when it was built on love and acceptance rather than performance and expectation. After dinner, Maya wanted to show Elena the puzzle they'd been working on, the tropical beach scene that was now about 3/4 complete. They sat on the floor together, fitting pieces while Maya chatted about her plans to visit a real beach someday. Daddy says maybe we can go when I'm on summer vacation if he saves enough money. I've never seen the ocean for real. Have you seen the ocean?
I have. Many times.
What's it like?
Elena thought about the beaches she'd visited, exclusive resorts in the Caribbean, corporate retreats in Hawaii, quick trips to the Hamptons between meetings. She'd seen the ocean dozens of times, but couldn't remember the last time she'd actually experienced it, actually stood in the sand and felt the water and paid attention to what it felt like rather than what networking opportunity it represented. It's beautiful, she said. Big and powerful and peaceful all at once. I think you're going to love it. Will you come with us when we go? The question was so innocent, so full of simple assumption that of course Elena would want to be part of their adventure, that she felt her throat tighten. If you want me to, I'd love that. Yay, then it's settled. We're all going to the beach together. Daniel appeared in the doorway. Maya, it's bedtime. Say goodnight to Elena.
Do I have to? We're almost done with the sky part. The sky will still be there tomorrow. Come on, troublemaker. Maya hugged Elena with the unself-conscious affection of a child who'd decided they were friends. Good night. Thanks for doing the puzzle with me. Thanks for inviting me. After Maya was settled in bed, Daniel and Elena sat on the couch with glasses of wine, the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed to fill every moment with conversation. She likes you, Daniel said finally. The feeling is mutual. She's an extraordinary kid. She is, and she doesn't give her trust easily. Her mom's death taught her that people can disappear. So when she decides she cares about someone, it's significant. Elena understood what he wasn't saying, that Maya's attachment was a responsibility, that if Elena was going to be part of their lives, she needed to be consistent and present in ways she wasn't used to being. I won't disappear, she said quietly. I hope not. Because, Elena, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a professional relationship for me anymore. Working together, having you around Maya tonight, this matters. You matter. And that scares me because I haven't let anyone matter this way since Sarah died. Elena set down her wine glass carefully. It scares me too. I've spent so long avoiding anything that might distract from work, anything that might make me vulnerable. But Daniel, these last few weeks have shown me what I've been missing, what I've been running from. Which is connection. Real human connection that isn't transactional or strategic. People who see me as more than just a CEO or a problem to be solved. She met his eyes. You and Maya, you've given me something I didn't know I needed. A reason to want something beyond professional success. Daniel reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused from years of manual work, completely different from the soft hands of executives she usually dealt with. This is complicated, he said. We work together now. There are power dynamics to consider, professional boundaries. I know, and we'll figure out how to navigate that. But Daniel, I don't want to pretend this is just professional when we both know it isn't. Me neither. He smiled slightly. Though I should warn you, dating a single dad comes with a lot of complications. Dinner dates interrupted by homework emergencies. Romantic moments cut short by someone needing help finding their favorite stuffed animal. A very opinionated 7-year-old who will absolutely have thoughts about everything. I think I can handle that. Can you? Because, Elena, my life is messy and complicated and will never fit neatly into a schedule. Maya will always come first. There will be sick days and school events and moments when I have to choose between work and her, and I'll choose her every time. I know, and that's part of why Elena paused, surprised by what she'd almost said. That's part of why this matters. You've shown me what it looks like to have your priorities right, to build a life around what actually matters, instead of sacrificing everything for professional achievement. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. We should probably take this slow. Figure out how to work together successfully before we add relationship complexity. Probably. But I want you to know that I'm interested. In you, in this, in seeing where it could go. Me too. He smiled, that genuine warmth that transformed his whole face. Now, you should probably go home before Maya wakes up and finds you still here. She'll assume that means you're moving in and start planning your room. Elena laughed and stood, reluctant to leave but knowing he was right. At his door, she turned back. Thank you for today. For the boardroom, for dinner, for everything. We're partners now. In the work, at least.
Maybe in other things too, if we're lucky. I think we might be. She walked the short distance to her own apartment, which felt less empty than it used to, but still hollow compared to the warmth she'd just left. But something had shifted. For the first time in years, Elena had something to look forward to beyond the next crisis or the next achievement. She had people who mattered, work that aligned with her values, a chance to build something better than what she'd had before. The next few months would be difficult. Implementing Daniel's security overhaul, managing board skepticism, proving that flexible work arrangements could produce exceptional results, all of it would require dedication and skill and probably more than a few late nights. But Elena was finally fighting for something worth fighting for. Not just her company or her position, but a vision of what work could look like when it valued human beings as much as human capital. And she wasn't fighting alone. That made all the difference. The first month of implementation was harder than Elena had anticipated. Daniel's new team started work scattered across different time zones and different life circumstances, connecting through video calls and shared documents rather than shared office space. The company's existing security team, accustomed to traditional hierarchies and FaceTime culture, resisted the changes with passive-aggressive efficiency. "They're undermining us," Daniel told Elena during their third week, frustration evident in his voice. They were in her office late on a Thursday afternoon, reviewing progress reports that showed slower advancement than projected. Kevin Morrison specifically. He's telling his team that the flexible arrangements mean people aren't really committed, that we're lowering standards to accommodate laziness. Elena felt anger flash through her, but she forced herself to breathe through it. "What do you need from me?" Direct conversation with him. Make it clear that this isn't optional, that resistance to the new approach is resistance to company direction. "Done. I'll meet with him tomorrow morning." But when Kevin Morrison sat across from her the next day, his defensiveness was immediately apparent. He was a 15-year veteran of Tech Vista, someone who'd risen through the ranks by being the first one in the office and the last one out, who wore his exhaustion like a badge of honor. "You're changing everything that made this company successful," he said bluntly. "We built Tech Vista on dedication and hard work. Now you're telling people they can work from home in their pajamas whenever they feel like it. I'm telling people they can structure their work around their lives instead of sacrificing their lives for work," Elena corrected. "And I'm measuring performance by results, not by how many hours someone sits at a desk." That's easy to say when you're not the one dealing with the daily operational reality. When someone on the team is unavailable because they're at a kid's soccer game, the rest of us have to pick up the slack. Or you adjust workflows so that individual availability doesn't create bottlenecks. That's what Daniel's been trying to implement, but you've been fighting him at every turn. Kevin's jaw tightened. Because his approach doesn't work in the real world. Maybe it sounds good in theory, but in practice, we need people who are available when we need them. Elena leaned back in her chair, studying him. She saw herself in his resistance, the person she'd been a month ago, convinced that her way was the only way, unable to imagine alternatives. "Kevin, I want to tell you something. A few weeks ago, I would have agreed with everything you just said. I built this company on the belief that success required total sacrifice. But I was wrong. Not because dedication doesn't matter, but because I confused dedication with availability. I excluded talented people who could have prevented the problems we're facing now because they needed flexibility I wasn't willing to provide. With respect, Elena, I don't think admitting you were wrong is a great leadership strategy when the company's already in crisis. No, admitting I was wrong when I'm actually wrong is exactly the leadership this company needs. Because pretending I have all the answers when evidence suggests otherwise isn't strength, it's ego." She met his eyes. "I'm asking you to try this approach for 2 more months. Give Daniel's team a real chance to prove themselves. If it's genuinely not working, we'll revisit the strategy. But if you're undermining it before it has a chance to succeed, you're not protecting the company. You're protecting your own discomfort with change." Kevin was silent for a long moment. "And if I can't get behind this approach? Then we'll have to discuss whether Tech Vista is still the right fit for you. I know that sounds harsh, but I'm serious about this transformation. I can't have senior leaders actively working against it." He left her office without committing either way, and Elena felt the weight of potential failure settling over her shoulders. Changing culture was supposed to be difficult, but she hadn't fully appreciated how much resistance would come from the people who'd succeeded under the old system.
That evening, she showed up at Daniel's apartment looking exhausted. Maya answered the door in paint-covered clothes, her face decorated with streaks of blue and purple. "We're doing art," she announced. "Do you want to paint with us?" "I probably shouldn't. I had a really difficult day and I'm not great company right now." Daniel appeared behind his daughter, took one look at Elena's face, and made a decision. "Maya, go wash your hands and face. It's almost dinner time. But now please." When Maya had reluctantly departed, Daniel pulled Elena inside and closed the door. "What happened?" "I'm trying to force cultural change on a company that doesn't want to change. Kevin Morrison basically told me the new approach is nonsense. Half the security team agrees with him, and I'm starting to think they might be right." "They're not right. They're uncomfortable, which is different." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've been in meetings with the new team all week, and Elena, they're doing incredible work. Sarah Chen has identified 3 critical vulnerabilities that the existing team missed completely. Marcus Wu's distributed authentication model is exactly what we need. They're producing results because they're not exhausted and burned out from working 80-hour weeks. They have energy and creativity because they also have lives." Elena sank onto the couch. "But it's slow. The board wants faster progress." "Good work takes time. You know that." Daniel sat beside her. "You're scared. I get it. You've put everything on the line for this approach, and if it fails, you lose not just your job, but your vindication for changing direction. But Elena, you can't let that fear make you abandon what you know is right. What if I'm wrong? What if Kevin and the others are right that you can't build excellence on flexibility? Then the last month of exceptional work from my team is an elaborate hallucination." He took her hand. "You're not wrong, but you're exhausted and scared, which makes it hard to see clearly. When was the last time you took a break?" "I don't have time for breaks." That's exactly what someone who desperately needs a break would say. He stood and pulled her up with him. "Come help Maya and me finish our painting, then have dinner with us, then go home and actually sleep instead of working until 2 in the morning. Daniel, no arguments. You're burned out. And if you keep pushing this hard, you're going to make bad decisions. Take tonight off. The company will survive." Elena let herself be led into the kitchen, where Maya had set up a painting station with newspapers spread across the table and watercolors arranged in careful rows. The little girl's face was mostly clean now, though she'd missed a streak of blue near her ear. "You're staying," Maya said happily. "Are you going to paint with us?" "I guess I am." They spent the next hour painting. Maya worked on an elaborate scene involving what appeared to be a dragon playing soccer with a unicorn. Daniel painted a surprisingly good landscape of a beach at sunset. Elena started with abstract shapes and colors, just letting herself feel the paint and the brush without trying to create anything specific. "That's really pretty," Maya observed, studying Elena's canvas. "What is it?" "I'm not sure yet. Maybe it's just feelings turned into colors." "I like it. Feelings should be colors more often." Something about the simple statement made Elena's chest tight. When had she stopped allowing herself to feel things fully, to express emotions without strategic purpose? When had everything become calculated instead of genuine? During dinner, spaghetti again, which Maya informed her was the best food in the world, Elena felt herself slowly relaxing. The conversation was easy and meaningless in the best way, full of Maya's stories about school and Daniel's gentle teasing and the comfortable rhythm of people who enjoyed each other's company. After Maya went to bed, Elena and Daniel sat together on the couch with tea instead of wine, both of them too tired for alcohol. "Thank you for tonight," Elena said. "I needed this more than I realized." "You're welcome." "And Elena, I want to tell you something. These last few weeks, working with you, building this team, seeing you fight for something you believe in even when it's hard, I've watched you become someone different, someone more whole." "I don't feel more whole. I feel terrified most of the time." "That's because you're letting yourself feel instead of just performing. Terror is part of being human." He smiled slightly. "But so is joy and connection and the knowledge that you're not alone in the fight." "I'm not used to not being alone." "I know, but you're learning. And for what it's worth, I think you're doing remarkably well for someone who's essentially rebuilding her entire identity while also trying to save a company." Elena leaned against him, letting herself draw comfort from his solid presence. What if it doesn't work? What if I've burned everything down for nothing? Then we figure out what comes next. But Elena, I don't think it's for nothing. Even if Tech Vista fails, you've proven something important, that you can change, that you can admit mistakes, that you can build something based on values instead of just tactics. That matters, regardless of the outcome. They sat in comfortable silence until Elena's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Marcus. She read it and felt her stomach drop. "What is it?" Daniel asked, seeing her expression. "One of our remaining major clients just announced they're terminating their contract, effective immediately." "Which client?" "Riverside Financial. They account for 18% of our revenue." Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "How bad is this?" "Bad enough that the board will probably call an emergency meeting. Bad enough that Gerald Santos might withdraw his support. Bad enough that Richard Bauer will absolutely use this to push for my removal." "Okay, then we deal with it. Together." Elena looked at him, at this man who'd chosen to tie his professional future to hers, who was facing potential disaster with calm determination instead of panic. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this mess." "You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose this, remember? And I don't regret it." He squeezed her hand. "Go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to handle this. But tonight, you need rest." Elena went back to her apartment but didn't sleep. Instead, she spent hours reviewing financial projections, trying to calculate how long Tech Vista could survive if other clients followed Riverside's lead. The numbers weren't good. By morning, her phone was exploding with messages. The board demanded an emergency meeting for Monday. The press had gotten wind of Riverside's departure and was speculating about Tech Vista's imminent collapse. 3 more clients requested meetings to discuss their ongoing relationships, which was corporate speak for preparing to jump ship. The emergency board meeting was even worse than Elena had anticipated. Richard Bauer had apparently spent the weekend rallying support because he came in with a formal proposal to remove Elena as CEO and install an interim leadership team while the board considered acquisition offers. "We've given your experimental approach a fair chance," Richard said, his voice full of false regret. "Unfortunately, the market has rendered its verdict. Clients don't have confidence in Tech Vista's direction under your leadership." "We've been implementing the new security infrastructure for exactly 4 weeks," Elena countered. "Complex system changes take time." "Time we don't have. Riverside's departure is already causing other clients to reconsider. We need decisive action to restore confidence, and that means leadership change." Gerald Santos looked troubled. "Elena, I supported giving you 6 months, but losing a client of Riverside's size is a significant setback. Can you give us any concrete reason to believe the situation will improve?" Elena looked at Daniel, who'd been sitting quietly beside her through the entire confrontation. He nodded slightly, giving her permission to share what they'd been working on. "Actually, yes. Daniel's team identified the vulnerability that led to Riverside's concerns. They've developed a patch that not only fixes the immediate problem, but reinforces the entire authentication system. We're ready to implement it across all client platforms within the next week." "A patch?" Victoria's skepticism was evident. "That's your solution? Another Band-Aid on a broken system?" "It's not a Band-Aid, it's a fundamental restructuring of how the system handles authentication. Sarah Chen, one of our new consultants, caught it because she approaches security differently than our traditional team. She saw the problem precisely because she wasn't trained to see systems the way everyone else does." Richard leaned forward. "And how much is this patch going to cost to implement? How much disruption to client operations?" Daniel spoke for the first time. "Minimal cost because we're using existing infrastructure more efficiently. And as for disruption, we've designed the implementation to be completely transparent to end users. Clients won't experience any downtime or service interruption." "That's impossible," Kevin Morrison said from his seat at the back of the room. Richard had invited him to provide technical expertise, which meant he was there to undermine Daniel's work. Any major system change requires downtime for testing and deployment. "It does if you're replacing components," Daniel agreed. "We're not replacing anything. We're restructuring the logic flow within the existing architecture.
Think of it as teaching the system to think differently rather than giving it new parts. Kevin started to argue, but Elena cut him off. This is exactly what I meant about bringing in different perspectives. Kevin, you're an excellent engineer using conventional approaches. But conventional approaches didn't prevent the vulnerabilities we're facing. Sarah Chen's unconventional background in cryptography and distributed systems gave her insights our traditional team missed. So you're saying our existing team is incompetent? Kevin's face was flushed with anger. I'm saying our existing team is doing excellent work within a limited framework. We needed to expand that framework, which is exactly what the new team provides. Richard sensed an opening. This is exactly the problem, Elena. You're creating division instead of unity. Your flexible work arrangements are causing resentment among the people who've been here all along, working traditional hours and following company protocols. You're destroying team cohesion in pursuit of an ideological agenda. I'm pursuing a functional approach to solving complex problems, Elena said. And yes, that creates discomfort for people who benefited from the old system. But comfort isn't the goal here. Excellence is. Then show us excellence, Gerald said quietly. Not promises of future improvement, but actual results we can point to when clients ask why they should stay with TechVista. Elena felt the weight of the moment settling over her. This was it. The point where she either had something concrete to offer or admitted defeat. She looked at Daniel again, and he gave her another small nod. They'd discussed this possibility, prepared for exactly this scenario. We have results, Elena said. Over the last 4 weeks, Daniel's team has identified and resolved 17 previously undetected vulnerabilities in our core system. They've reduced authentication processing time by 32% without compromising security. They've developed the distributed model that will prevent single-point failures like the one that concerned Riverside. And they've done all of this while working flexible schedules that traditional management would consider inadequate. She pulled up a presentation on the conference room screen, showing detailed technical data and performance metrics that Marcus had helped compile over the weekend. This is what excellence looks like when you value expertise over face time. When you trust people to do their jobs without micromanaging their hours. When you build teams around capabilities instead of availability. The board members leaned forward, studying the data. Even Richard looked surprised by the comprehensiveness of the results. These numbers are impressive, James Chen admitted. But how do we know they'll translate to restored client confidence? Because we're not asking clients to trust promises anymore, Daniel said. We're offering proof. Let us present this to your remaining major clients. Show them exactly what we've accomplished and what we're implementing. Let the work speak for itself. And if they're not impressed, Richard challenged, then you'll have concrete evidence that this approach doesn't work. And you can make leadership changes with actual justification instead of speculation. Gerald looked around the table, gauging the other board members' reactions. I'm inclined to give this a chance. The data is compelling, and we did commit to 6 months. One major client loss, while serious, isn't grounds to abandon the entire strategy. It is if other clients follow, Victoria pointed out. Which is why we propose the direct presentations, Elena said. Let us make our case to each major client individually. If we can't restore confidence within the next 3 weeks, I'll resign voluntarily. No fight, no drama. Clean transition to whatever leadership the board prefers. The room went silent. Elena had just put everything on the line. Not 6 months, but 3 weeks to prove her entire approach worked. Marcus looked at her with barely concealed alarm, but she kept her focus on the board. 3 weeks, Richard repeated. And if even one more major client leaves during that time? Then I'm out. But if we retain them and restore confidence, you give us the full 6 months we were promised to complete the security overhaul. Gerald considered, then nodded. I can support that. Anyone opposed? No hands went up. Even Richard seemed satisfied with terms that gave him a clear victory condition. Then we have an agreement, Gerald said. 3 weeks, Elena. Make them count. The meeting adjourned, and Elena felt the enormity of what she'd just committed to crash over her. 3 weeks to save everything. Daniel waited until they were alone in her office to speak. That was risky. It was necessary. Gerald was losing faith, and if we lost him, we lost everything. At least now we have a clear goal and a defined timeline. And if we fail? Then we fail knowing we gave it everything we had. She met his eyes. Are you okay with this?
I just put your job on the line too. I was prepared for that the moment I accepted your offer. And Elena, we can do this. The work is solid. We just need to communicate it effectively. They spent the next 2 weeks in a blur of preparation and presentations. Each major client required customized proposals showing exactly how the new security infrastructure would address their specific concerns. Daniel and his team worked around the clock, within their defined hours, but with absolute focus and efficiency. Sarah Chen proved invaluable in these meetings, explaining complex technical concepts with a clarity that came from years of teaching while working part-time. Marcus Wu's quiet confidence won over skeptical IT directors. The whole team demonstrated exactly what Elena had been arguing for, that excellence didn't require sacrificing everything else. Kevin Morrison, to Elena's surprise, eventually came around. During the second week, he approached her office with an expression that suggested he'd been wrestling with something difficult. "Can I talk to you?" he asked. "Of course. Come in." He sat down, clearly uncomfortable. "I've been watching Daniel's team work, actually working with them on some of the client presentations. And I need to admit something." "What's that?" "They're good. Really good. Better than I wanted to acknowledge because it meant admitting I was wrong." He met her eyes. "I built my entire career on being the person who sacrificed everything for work. I wore my exhaustion like armor, convinced that's what made me valuable. Watching people produce better results while actually having lives outside the office. It forced me to confront some uncomfortable questions about my choices. I understand that. I've been confronting those same questions. The thing is, I have a daughter I barely know. She's 14 now, and I've missed most of her childhood because I was always at the office. My ex-wife has primary custody because I couldn't commit to consistent parenting time." His voice cracked slightly. "I told myself it was worth it because I was building something important. But Elena, I don't even know my own kid. And watching Daniel with Maya, seeing how he manages to be both an excellent father and an excellent engineer, it's made me realize I didn't have to make the choices I made." Elena felt her throat tighten. "It's not too late to change." "Isn't it? She's almost grown. I've already missed the important years."
You've missed some years, not all of them. And Kevin, if you start showing up now, consistently and genuinely, you might be surprised by what's still possible. He nodded slowly. "I want to support what you're doing here, really support it, not just go through the motions. Because if we can build a company where people don't have to choose between professional excellence and personal relationships, that matters. That's worth fighting for." "Thank you." "And Kevin, consider taking advantage of the flexible arrangements yourself. Reconnect with your daughter. Show her that you've learned something." "I might do that." After he left, Elena allowed herself a moment of hope. Cultural change was happening, slowly but genuinely. People were starting to understand that the old way wasn't the only way. The client presentations went better than Elena had dared to hope. The combination of solid technical solutions and compelling data won over even the most skeptical executives. By the end of the third week, TechVista had not only retained all its remaining major clients, but had signed 2 new ones who'd heard about the innovative security approach. The board meeting that followed was a vindication Elena had barely believed possible. Gerald Santos opened with genuine praise. James Chen admitted he'd underestimated the potential of flexible work arrangements. Even Victoria Hastings, who'd been consistently hostile, acknowledged that the results spoke for themselves. Richard Bauer was notably quiet, clearly frustrated by the outcome but unable to argue with success. "You've earned your 6 months," Gerald told Elena. "Hell, you've earned my confidence that this approach can actually work. Well done." After the meeting, Elena and Daniel walked out of TechVista's headquarters into a crisp autumn evening. The city lights were just starting to come on, and the air held that particular quality of possibility that fall evenings sometimes have. "We did it," Elena said, still processing the reality. "You did it. I just provided technical support." "That's categorically untrue, and you know it. Daniel, none of this would have worked without you. The security solutions, the team building, the client presentations, all of it required your expertise and your willingness to take a risk on a CEO who'd rejected you 7 years ago." "She's not the same CEO who rejected me. That person wouldn't have admitted she was wrong, wouldn't have fought this hard to change not just her company, but herself." They walked in comfortable silence for a few blocks. neither ready to go home yet, both savoring the feeling of having survived something that could have destroyed them. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now we actually implement everything we promised. Finish the security overhaul, build out the team, prove that this wasn't a one-time success, but a sustainable approach." That's the professional answer. What about the personal one? Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her. "The personal answer is that I'd like to take you on an actual date. Not a work dinner or a casual meal with Maya present, but a real date where we can explore whatever this is between us without the complications of crisis management." Elena smiled. "I'd like that too." "Saturday night? Maya's having a sleepover at her friend's house, which means I have the evening free." Saturday night sounds perfect. Their first real date was both awkward and wonderful in the way first dates often are when the people involved already know each other well. They went to a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, nothing fancy, and talked for hours about everything except work. Daniel told her about his childhood in Oregon, about how he'd fallen in love with computers in middle school, about meeting Sarah and building a life together before cancer stole her away. Elena shared things she'd never told anyone, how growing up poor had driven her relentless pursuit of success, how she'd equated financial security with personal worth, how lonely she'd been even at the height of her professional achievements. "I built everything around the fear of going back to having nothing," she admitted. "And in the process, I ended up with nothing that actually mattered, money and success and an empty apartment where nobody cared if I came home." "That's not true anymore," Daniel said gently. "Maya cares. I care. You've built something real, Elena, beyond the professional accomplishments. I know. And it terrifies me because caring about people means risking loss. You know that better than anyone." "I do. Losing Sarah almost destroyed me, but Elena, if I had never loved her because I was afraid of loss, I would have missed the best years of my life. Maya wouldn't exist. The love and joy and connection we had, that was worth the grief that followed." "How did you survive it?" "Barely at first, but Maya needed me, and that gave me a reason to keep going. And eventually I learned that love doesn't end just because someone dies. Sarah's still with me in every good choice I make, every value I teach Maya, every moment I choose connection over isolation." He reached across the table and took Elena's hand. "Choosing to care about you doesn't diminish what I had with Sarah. It honors it by proving I'm still capable of opening my heart even after loss." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm not used to people saying things like that to me." "Then you've been spending time with the wrong people." They left the restaurant and walked through Brooklyn's lamplit streets, eventually ending up at the waterfront where they could see Manhattan's skyline glittering across the river. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said as they stood looking at the lights. "When you applied to Tech Vista 7 years ago, when we rejected you for needing flexibility, did you hate me?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "I didn't know you personally, so hate would be too strong. But I was angry at what you represented, a system that punished people for having human needs. I was angry that companies like yours could waste talented people because they didn't fit a narrow definition of commitment. Do you still see me that way?" "No. I see someone who had the courage to recognize her mistakes and change course even when it was professionally risky. I see someone fighting to build something better than what she inherited." He turned to face her fully. "Elena, people aren't defined by who they were, they're defined by who they choose to become." She kissed him then, standing on the Brooklyn waterfront with Manhattan's lights reflected in the water, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. For years she'd equated vulnerability with weakness, connection with distraction, love with liability. But standing there with Daniel, feeling the warmth of his arms around her and the possibility of something real and lasting, she understood that she'd been wrong about so much more than just hiring practices. Over the next several months, Tech Vista's transformation continued. Daniel's team completed the security overhaul ahead of schedule, and the distributed authentication model became an industry standard that other companies started licensing. The flexible work arrangements that had seemed so radical proved not just viable but superior, attracting top talent that had been unavailable to companies demanding traditional availability. Kevin Morrison reduced his hours and started attending his daughter's volleyball games. Sarah Chen was promoted to senior security architect.
Marcus Wu published a paper on distributed systems that won recognition from the International Cybersecurity Council. The team Daniel had built became the foundation for a new kind of tech company, one that valued expertise and results over performative dedication. Elena's relationship with the board evolved too. Richard Bauer eventually resigned after his conflict of interest with Cyberforce became public knowledge. Victoria Hastings, freed from Richard's influence, became one of Elena's strongest advocates. Gerald Santos joked that he'd known all along the approach would work, though everyone knew that wasn't quite true. More importantly, Elena's relationship with Daniel deepened into something neither of them had expected to find again. They moved slowly, deliberately, always conscious of Maya's needs and feelings. The little girl adapted to having Elena around with the resilience of children, gradually accepting her not as a replacement for her mother, but as someone who cared about her and her father deeply. 6 months after that storm-soaked night when everything began, Tech Vista held its annual shareholder meeting. Elena stood at the podium looking out at investors, employees, and press, preparing to deliver results that exceeded everyone's expectations. A year ago, this company was in crisis, she began. We had security vulnerabilities, hostile board members, and a culture that was burning out our best people. Today, we're profitable, growing, and becoming known not just for our technology, but for how we treat the people who create it. She clicked to a slide showing the team that had made it possible, Daniel and Sarah and Marcus, and all the others who'd been rejected or overlooked by traditional tech companies. This is what excellence looks like when you build it on respect for human needs rather than exploitation of human dedication. When you understand that people with lives outside work bring better perspectives to the problems inside work, when you measure commitment by results rather than hours logged. The presentation covered the technical achievements, the financial improvements, the client growth. But Elena spent more time talking about the cultural transformation, about what it meant to build a company where people could be excellent professionals and present parents, skilled engineers and engaged community members, ambitious leaders and whole human beings. We're not perfect, she concluded. We still make mistakes, still have work to do on making this culture fully inclusive and genuinely supportive, but we've proven something important, that the false choice between professional excellence and personal well-being is exactly that, false. We can build companies that value both. We can create workplaces that bring out the best in people without demanding they sacrifice everything else. The applause that followed was genuine and sustained. After the formal presentation, Elena found Daniel waiting for her in the lobby with Maya, who was dressed in her best dress and holding a bouquet of flowers that were slightly crushed from enthusiastic handling. "These are for you," Maya announced, "because Daddy said you did a really good job and we should celebrate." "Thank you, sweetheart. They're beautiful. We're going to go get ice cream to celebrate. Do you want to come?" Elena looked at Daniel, at this man who'd shown her what it meant to have priorities aligned with values, at his daughter who'd taught her that kindness wasn't weakness and cookies could be important, at these two people who'd become her family in all the ways that mattered. "I would love to come," she said. They walked out of Tech Vista's headquarters together into a perfect spring afternoon. The city was alive with possibility, with people rushing toward their own destinations and dreams and complicated lives. A year ago, Elena had been locked out of her apartment, standing alone in a hallway, unable to get past a door that seemed to symbolize everything keeping her from the life she needed. Now she understood that she hadn't needed someone to open that door. She'd needed someone to show her that there were other doors entirely, other ways of living and working and being that she'd never considered because she'd been too busy forcing her way through the wrong entrances. Daniel had done that for her. Maya had done that. The team she'd built, the culture she'd transformed, the values she'd finally aligned with action, all of it had come from recognizing that being locked out had been an opportunity, not a crisis. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked as they walked. "Doors," Elena said, "and how sometimes the best thing that can happen is getting locked out of where you thought you needed to be." He smiled and took her hand, Maya skipping ahead of them on the sidewalk, already planning which ice cream flavor she'd choose. Elena Cruz had spent 15 years building an empire on sacrifice and isolation, convinced that success required giving up everything else. It had taken a storm, a locked door, and a man who knew how to fix broken things to show her that she'd been building the wrong thing entirely. Now she was building something different, something better, a company that valued people, a relationship built on genuine connection, a life that had room for work and love and Maya's soccer games and quiet evenings painting feelings into colors. She was building a life worth living, not just a career worth citing. And it had all started with the simple question she hadn't been able to answer that rain-soaked night. Are you okay? Now finally, she was. Not perfect, not without struggles or challenges or moments of doubt, but okay in the ways that mattered, connected, purposeful, valued, and valued by people she valued in return. The locked door had opened onto something far better than what she'd been trying to force her way into. And standing here in the sunlight with Daniel and Maya, heading toward ice cream and laughter, and all the small moments that made life rich, Elena understood what she'd been missing for so long. She'd been trying to build success when what she needed was meaning, trying to prove her worth when what she needed was to accept it, trying to control everything when what she needed was to trust in connection. The storm had passed, the doors were open, and Elena Cruz, who'd spent so long locked out of the life she needed, had finally found her way home. Not to a place, but to people. Not to isolation, but to belonging. Not to perfection, but to something infinitely more valuable. The messy, complicated, beautiful reality of being fully human in a world that too often asks people to be anything but. She had Daniel's hand in hers, Maya's laughter floating back to them on the spring air, and a future that stretched out full of possibility and promise, and the kind of success that actually mattered. The locked door had been a beginning, not an ending. And what came after was everything she'd never known to want but had always needed.